I think hopefully now the number.
Okay, thanks everyone for the patience. Thanks for coming back after the nice beach party. In a second we'll see Kavita, I hope.
No, but we see a shock.
Yes, it's close enough. It's still 3,000 kilometers away. Hi Kavita, can you hear us?
Can you? Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, perfect. Yes, and in real time, sort of. So thanks everyone abroad for getting back to us, with us here. We will now or soon announce the paper awards winners, but just before that, I'll invite Kavita to say a few words.
So I know that, as you know from this morning, there was lag, but I'm just going to work through that. So what we thought we'd do is tell you a little bit how the papers were selected for publication in ICCP. And one of the reasons we wanted to go over the process a little bit is because this is a very diverse group. We have computer graphics, computer vision, computer computational photography people, and this year also optics people. And each sub-community has a slightly different cultural norms sort of on how papers get accepted. So we thought it'd be good to just quickly review what some of the changes we made this year. Our focus remained, our processes are very similar to the computer vision conferences, but our focus remained on high quality reviewing in each step. So we'll talk a little bit about these. So reviews in ICCP are made by a program committee, which was of course handpicked by the program chairs. And you can look at our website and you'll see what we did is we really worked on trying to get mostly senior reviewers or people who'd had a lot of ICCP experience, because we felt that was very important for the quality of the final product. ICCP follows a double-blind protocol as in CVPR and ICCV. And full-length papers undergo a very rigorous review. This year, for example, each paper received at least 4 very detailed expert reviews. And you can see, those of you who are authors can see that the quality of the reviews was very high. In ICCP, authors submit rebuttals, and these sometimes include new experiments and simulations, and we allow that. And after discussions by the program committee, the chairs, so Yoav, Ori, and I, reached decisions regarding accept, reject, or conditional acceptance. And one thing that, I mean, those of you who are in the various communities, sometimes in the graphics community, you know that this process is very iterative and important, and a lot of improvements happen to the paper. In the vision community, typically after a paper is accepted, there isn't much follow-up with the authors. We wanted to make sure that if the authors promised things in a rebuttal, it did make it to the final paper. So even papers that were accepted needed to show, just like in journals and just like in SIGGRAPH, that the final version indeed had all the corrections and all the promises that were made by the authors. So all of you authors who did that, thank you very much for the effort you put into it. I think it really improved the quality of the papers, which we're very proud of. And many papers through this process underwent a few rounds of revisions until they reached the form you see. So with that, I'll turn it over back to Ori to talk about what the final numbers were.
Okay, thank you, Kavita. This went perfectly smooth. So in short, it's not easy getting a paper in ICCP. And for me, coming from the optics community, this was a very interesting review process where the reviewers that were for each paper, we could discuss between ourselves before the final decision, which is not something we are used to in optics conferences. And this worked very well. So it's not easy getting a paper to ICCP, but then you, on us, the audience, enjoy papers that have high standards, that are worth attending their orals. So we're happy that everyone are here. This year we received in total 52 valid submissions of paper. We accepted after this rigorous process 24 papers. So it's a bit less than half. Out of these 24 accepted papers, 7 papers are published as is in IEEE PAMI. So we have it perhaps in the next slide. After having gone through an additional revisions and reviews by TPAMI editors, Ko Nishino and Kalyan Sunkavali. You can see them, Yoav?
No, you mentioned them. No,
okay, we don't have the pictures here. Great. These are the best papers, the ones that we are going to announce shortly. I feel like in the Oscars, yeah.
Yeah, we mentioned this.
Yeah, we are also taking the time. Yoav, how are you this morning? What do you think about the weather? So these are the best papers, the one that we will announce shortly. The best papers in our batch, but we needed to select the winners. So this is our best paper award committee. These are Shri, Singbing, and Rick. This is a very senior team of computer vision and graphics, and they have been followed ICCP through the years. Shri, by the way, co-chaired the first ICCP in 2009. They selected 2 winners, a best paper and a runner-up. Yoav.
So, the best paper runner-up is high resolution, deep imaging using confocal time of flight diffuse optical tomography by, and I apologize to the authors for not knowing how to pronounce their last names, so I would say Yonghee, Ankit, Hyun, Andreas, Jacob, and Ashok. Congratulations. And the best paper award. By the way, the previous, the runner-up will appear on Tuesday. So I just want to remind everybody, this is just the beginning of the conference, okay? So we have 2 more days of conferencing, not here in Haifa, it's going to be completely remote. So this paper that I've just mentioned is going to be on Tuesday, so keep up with us to the last day and enjoy great talks. Okay, and the best paper is designing display pixel layouts for under panel cameras. A very nice paper by Anki and Ashwin. Congratulations to the winners. We quote from. So you've seen the very senior committee, award committee. I'll just mention a few words that they said about this paper. It says it addresses a problem that is very relevant to many real-world applications. It would be of interest to display phone manufacturers. It has the highest potential for impact also very timely in the days of virtual classes, okay, which probably are, in some sense, are here to stay. So this paper, the winning paper, actually will also be presented on Tuesday, actually in the last session of the conference. So keep strong with us to the very end and enjoy it. The winners cannot be here for obvious reasons to come and pick their award. So we'll ship them the awards, but I think they are here with us online, right? Can we see them now? We don't need to see the slides now.
Switch to the Zoom.
We won!
Yeah, look at us. Oh,
yeah, but where's...
Thanks.
Thanks, Kavita.
We can now see you guys.
Yeah, Ashwin and Ashok. Can we see Ashwin and Ashok more better? Okay, they're up there waving their hands. Yeah.
If I say something, maybe you'll see me.
Congratulations,
No.
Ashok and your team.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone. It's good to see so many people in person, like being in person, that is.
Yeah. And that's Ashwin. By the way, they are part of our organizing team, very dedicated people. So they've handled the budgets and the publication. So it's really great that their teams won. And thank you very much. Congratulations. And thank you very much, Kavita, for joining us. Okay, so we now start the main program of orals. Finally, the technical program. It includes talks of papers reviewed as we just described.
Signing out.
Yeah, all right. So we're going to show papers that were reviewed as described above. And in addition, also the program includes orals of physics optics abstracts, on which we will explain a little bit later. And the first session of this kind is chaired by Yoav Shechtman, who also happens to be our local broadcasting chair. Yoav. Yoav?
He's broadcasting.
Broadcasting. Okay. Good afternoon, Haifa. So. We are all winners, everybody here. So, as you have mentioned, we are going to have 4 talks in this session, and these are much shorter talks than the keynotes. Our first talk will be given by, it's going to be remote, so it's going to be projected here, and then we'll have a Q&A session with a microphone, which will be broadcast. The speaker is C1 Shen, who is currently a master's student in Shanghai Tech in the Intelligent Photonomatics Lab. And the work is joint equally with another student who's called Z Wang. And the work is titled Non-Line of Sight Imaging via Neural Transient Fields. And very shortly, it will be broadcast here. I have to verify, so I'll go back there. Okay.
Hi, I am Zi Wang from Shanghai Tech University. I am going to present our framework for non-line of sight imaging called Neural Transient Fields. Non-line of sight imaging is an emerging technology in applications ranging from autonomous driving to remote sensing. In order to image the hidden object, most unknown setups orient an ultra-fast pulsed laser beam towards a relay wall in the line of sight. The wall diffuses the laser into spherical wavefronts. As the wavefront hits the scene and bounces back onto the wall, we use a time-of-flight SPAD detector at picosecond resolution to record the time of arrival and the number of the returning photons. The SPAD can thus produce transients. A single pixel corresponds to a specific pair of illumination and detection spots on the wall, and also corresponds to a histogram of the photon counts versus time beams. The transients contain rich geometric information of the hidden scene, and to recover the object from transients is a typical inverse imaging problem. Recent reconstruction methods have shown promising results. LCT proposed the confocal setting, which sets the illumination point and the detection point at the same location on the wall. And in this talk, we will always use the confocal setting, with the assumption of non-Burton or isotropic reflection of the object. LCT and DLCT transforms the inverse imaging problem into a deconvolution problem and solved it with Wheeler filtering. The Fisher field uses the Rayleigh-Sommerfeld diffraction operator to formulate the endless imaging problem as a wave imaging problem, and solves it using deconvolution technique. FK explains the endless imaging problem from the perspective of wave optics. It transforms the inverse problem into a wave migration problem. Well, there are still some limitations in current methods. First, the resolution of the reconstruction scenes is fixed. Most methods divide the entire space into fixed voxels based on the resolution of the input data. Some methods also limit the material of the reconstructed objects. In order to overcome these limitations, we present a novel volumetric endless imaging framework. Our technique is inspired by recent neural radiance field, or NERF. NERF conducts 3D reconstruction and view synthesis from a set of input images. Different from existing techniques, NERF uses a multi-layer perceptron to represent the entire scene, which takes spatial position and viewing direction as input and outputs the density of the position and the color of the viewing direction. NERF samples an array and uses the volume rendering technique to establish the relationship between the neural network and the training data. It optimizes the implicit function through the difference between them. We observe that endless imaging resembles view synthesis problem in that each scanning point on the wall resembles a virtual camera which captures the transients of the endless scene. Compared with NERF, the most important change is that in NERF, light travels in the form of a line, while in endless problem, the light travels in the form of spherical waves. Let's move on to see how we establish our neural transient fields. First, instead of on a line, we sample on a spherical wavefront. Then we parameterize every point on the wavefront under spherical coordinates to facilitate sampling and derivation of volume rendering. However, recall that endless imaging systems need to scan different spots on the relay wall needs to inconsistent spherical coordinates for the same location in the space. This will cause challenges in network training and inference. So we need to transform them to their corresponding Cartan coordinates. A multi-layer perceptron takes them as input and outputs density and view-dependent albedo inferences. We want to mention that the view-dependent albedo enables the framework to reconstruct different materials. We then propose our transient rendering technique to predict the transients, and we use the difference between the prediction and the measured transients to optimize the multi-layer perceptron. Now, let's take a closer look at our transient rendering technique. Our rendering model considers the density as the number of elementary particles in space and albedo as the reflectivity of them in a certain direction. In this way, the energy change during the wavefront propagation comes from the absorption and reflectance by particles. What the SPAD detects at each moment is the integral of the contributions of all particles on the hemisphere corresponding to the detection point. By solving the first-order differential equation, we can derive the complete transient rendering model. However, the computational cost of such a formula is very large. The computational cost mainly comes from the attenuation coefficient. So, if we assume that the unknown scene is all opaque and does not exhibit self-occlusions, we can remove the attenuation item to simplify the formulation. In our experiments, we found that this formula is sufficient to achieve good reconstruction results for most unknown scenes. Here we show how to numerically compute the continuous integral with uniformly sampled theta and phi. Now let's see how we optimize our New Year transient fields. We use the L2 norm between the captured and predicted measurement and loss function. In every training batch, we use a one-dimensional histogram from the whole 3D data. However, different from NERF, in unknown setting, SPAD only captures a sparse set of spots on the wall. So, we propose the two-stage training strategy in order to improve performance. First, let's see how to deal with the training bias with two-stage training. We use a bunny for an example. Because of self-occlusion, bunny's right ear can only be observed by scanning points in the upper left corner of the wall. This means that the points on the wall are not uniform for the observation of the scene. We show the loss distribution of the scanning points after we equally input the data to train the neural network. We can see the loss in the upper left corner is obviously larger than other spots. So the histogram with higher loss should be more fully trained in the following training stage. Therefore, we propose that after a uniform training in the first stage, we resample the data according to the loss distribution with MCMC, and then we use the resampled data for the second stage training. Besides, let's see our hierarchical sampling strategy. Recall that we uniformly sample the hemisphere at each moment to calculate transient. This does not take full advantage of our continuous scene representation. The main idea of hierarchical sampling is that the density of the uniform sampled points shows where objects are more likely to exist in space. So, we propose that every time after a uniform sampling, we perform a non-uniform sampling based on the density map. In this way, the points with higher density can be more fully sampled and trained. Here we show how to numerically calculate the transient with ununiform sampled points. Here is the results with the two-stage training and hierarchical sampling strategies. We can see that with the help of them, our methods manage to recover the left ear of the bunny, which is insufficiently observed. Here is more experimental results. We compare our results with some sorter methods on simulated bunny data from the unknown dataset. Both qualitative and quantitative experiments shows New Year transient fields achieves comparable reconstruction quality to sorter. It also shows that our methods can tackle challenging geometry, such as the ear of the bunny. We also built our own capture system. Here is the results on our resolution board data, which contains higher noise than other real data. We can see phasor field gives the most clear result. Other methods can also reconstruct the large edges. To further test the robustness of New Year transient fields on occlusions, we experiment on a semi-occluded scene from the unknown dataset. Phasor field is most sensitive to occlusions. We could say that our methods produce sharper edges of both front and back planes. In a summary, we present a novel New Year modeling framework called New Year transient fields for unknown imaging using a multilayer perceptron. According to the property of light propagation in unknown setting, we formulate the unknown imaging model under spherical coordinates, and we also propose the two-stage training and hierarchical sampling strategies to improve performance. We believe that New Year transient fields demonstrates that deep learning provides an alternative and potentially feasible solution to a broader class of inverse imaging problems. However, there are still many challenges. For example, current framework is sensitive to heavy noise. Also, training usual transient fields takes a long time for each scene. So, how to deal with denoising problem and how to introduce priors to speed up training or further improve the results may be valuable research direction. We heartfully thank all the reviewers and curious for their insightful comments and recommendations. Thank Mingye Wu for his discussion. Thank you very much for your attention. Please feel free to access our code or paper website for more details. Thank you very much. Hi, I am Ziwang from Shanghai Tech University.
Let's hear it again. Okay. Thank you very much, Siwan. Can you hear me? Thank you very much, Siwan. You were clapped here if you didn't hear it. So. Do we hear them? Tell them to. Can you please say something? Do you hear me? Is it this microphone maybe? הם רואים אותי? רואים אותי? Can you hear me? אוקיי. כי הם יצטרכו לענות על שאלות, אז צריך שהם יוכלו לדבר. Okay, we'll wait until this little technicality is settled, so we can hear what they answer, hopefully. Think of questions, by the way. Does anyone have questions?
Do you want to answer?
I can try. I don't think they want me to answer. Do we have questions? I will start with a question, but first let's open a communication. Can you hear me? Can you wave if you hear me?
Yes, can you hear us now?
Yes. Let's clap. Hey, yeah. We were clapping for several minutes until now. Okay, so we shall start with a small question. So first of all, thank you very much for the talk. I was wondering about the acquisition. I was wondering about the acquisition time of the system. Whether how long it takes to acquire a bunny, and if you think of how would you make that faster? How would you improve that?
So the training time of our neural transient fields depends on the resolution of the spatial resolution on the relay world. So for 200 for resolution of 250, it will take about 10 to 20 hours to train a good bounding result. And if you decrease the resolution on the wall, and the training time will be decreased in the same way, but the resolution of the reconstruction bounding will be decreased also. So, and the other very important thing is that the technique we use hierarchical sampling in our training, and the resampling technique we use is Monte Carlo Markov chain, and it will also take a lot of time to compute the non-uniformly sampled points. So if you have enough hardware resources, so we recommend that you could increase the number of uniform sampled points, but do not use hierarchical sampling because it will take a lot of more times. So the average time of our best written general result is about 10 hours.
Thank you. We're short on time, right? Any more last quick question? Okay. Is there anything on the YouTube? Do you see? Okay, so thank you very much. Let's thank them again. Siwan. Okay. So our next speaker. Our next speaker is Shai El-Malem, right? Yeah. Shai El-Malem, come up here. And that is going to be part of the optics track. And to explain a bit more about what that means, we have Professor Ori Katz.
Thank you, Yoav. So just a quick note for something that is new this year in ICCP. So what is computational photography? If you think about it, it's at the intersection between physics and imaging optics, sensors, signal processing, computer vision, and graphics. And it seeks at the creation of creating new photographic imaging functionalities and experience that go beyond the possibilities of exclusive disparate camera or image processing technologies. And ICCP has been the meeting place for researchers from a variety of disciplines. And we think that cross-fertilization is a key goal here. However, the publication culture of us, physicists and optics people, is a bit different than the one in computer vision or computer graphics. And we are used to sending abstract to conferences, short abstracts, and giving orals that are usually non-papers orals. And we wanted to bring the physicists and the optics people together with the graphics community and the computer vision. And this is why from this year, ICCP also accepts orals in a non-paper track. We called it the physics optics track. Not sure it's the best catchy name, but let's see. And that's the reason why we added it this year. And this is in addition to the presentation of papers that underwent the rigorous review process that we just heard before by Kavita and the first talk that we just heard. The abstract has been judged and selected by a newly formed optics board, which you can find on the website. I want to mention their names: Dan Oron, who is with us here, Sylvain Gigan, Laura Waller, Katie Baumann, Roark Horstmeyer, Hugo Defienne, Andreas Welten, Yael Roichman, who is also with us here somewhere, Alexander Aubry, and Nick Antipa. And these guys reviewed a total of 44 submissions that we had in the physics optics track, out of which we accepted 19 papers. So this was quite a selective process. And the next paper that we'll hear, the next work, is from this track, one of these 19 selected works. And the title is Towards a Lensless Polarization Camera by Shai El-Malem and Raja Gires from Tel Aviv University. So please, Shai.
Okay, good afternoon. Thanks for the introduction, and I'll present our work on the way towards a lensless polarization camera. Polarization is a property of light or electromagnetic waves in general, which is defined as the angle and phase between the components of the electric field. And as you can see here, if we have two components without any phase difference in a specific angle we'll have a linearly polarized light in this angle. And if we'll have some phase difference, we can get circularly polarized light or elliptical polarized light. And as you can guess, it's much less intuitive than comparing to intensity and color, because the human eye cannot see it, but still it has many applications. And specifically, we will discuss polarization imaging or polarization cameras, which can map the polarization state of the entire scene and can be used both for enhancing the imaging conditions or to map things that cannot be seen in conventional imaging, like we see here on the bottom, both to enhance object detection and to map stress of transparent materials. Generally, in order to perform polarization imaging, we need to measure or to generate images of the four Stokes parameters, marked here in purple, and we can calculate them using several polarization images, marked here in pink, that we can take using a conventional camera and some configuration of a polarizer and a wave plate. And in this talk, we'll concentrate on linear polarization, so how we can measure these three Stokes parameters using 4 polarization images of 4 different taken using 4 different linear polarizers in 0, 45, 90, and 135 degrees. So most existing polarization camera use either focal plane division, like the known color biosensor with 4 different filters on chip, which are fabricated in the chip level, or using division of time, using a conventional camera and polarization filters that are interchangeably shifted in time. So for the division of focal plane, we need complex chip level fabrication, and when we are using the division of time approach, we are limited in the dynamics of the scene because we need to align these 4 images taken separately. Recently, several approaches were presented for a lensless camera, either using a bare sensor or some controllable aperture or a phase mask or an amplitude mask or a random diffuser. Some of them were actually presented in some configurations in previous ICCP conferences. So maybe some of the others are here with us online. So if you're here, thank you for waking up so early or staying awake so late. And we'll concentrate in this work on the diffuser cam approach from the Computational Imaging Group at Berkeley, which is based on a simple diffuser, a random diffuser placed in a few millimeters in front of a bare sensor. And the principle behind all of these diffuser-based cameras is the PSF of the diffuser, which is a random caustic-like, which has a random caustic-like pattern, which is both wide, but has many narrow features which enable the reconstruction of a sharp image even from a partially sampled image. And we can use it in order to compress an additional modality together with the two-dimensional images like depth, time, or spectrum. And our work is inspired by this time compression or spectral compression, and we want to take a similar path to generate a lensless polarization camera. We'll start with the polarized light scene, represented here as the 4 sub-images in different polarization angles. And we take an image of it using the diffuser with its PSF. And we also add a very simple polarization filter directly on the sensor. And we get a diffuse and multiplex polarization image. From it, we can reconstruct the full polarization image, which includes the 4 sub-images in the different polarization angles. So the filter is actually very, very simple. We take, this is one period of it. We take simple stripes of polarizers in 0, 45, 90, and 135 degrees. And we just replicate this period on the sensor. And the actual trade-off here is the stripe width. As the stripe width is smaller, we get better sampling, but it's more complex for fabrication. And we achieved good enough results with stripe width of roughly half a millimeter, between half a millimeter and 1 millimeter, which is between 128 to 256 pixels in our sensor. And note that the fact that the period of the filter is one-dimensional, it's not an issue because the diffuser PSF enables reconstruction even from partially sampled image, even in one dimension. So we will see it later that even such coarse sampling enables full reconstruction. We'll return to our final goal, which is the polarization image that you want to reconstruct, which is composed of 4 sub-images. Each one is a color image. So totally we have a volume of W by H by 12 channels. And we want to reconstruct it from the diffused and multiplexed polarization image. So as you might have guessed, the reconstruction algorithm or the inverse problem is highly ill-posed, and we have to use some sort of prior. And polarization image, as you can see here in the simple example of a polarized backlight, a computer screen, and some plastic materials with birefringence, which means that due to mechanical stress, the refractive index in different direction is different, which changes the polarization. So all these color shifts or color transition you see are real. These are not artifacts due to the wind that you've had earlier. And we need to actually reconstruct those. So as you can see, some of the edges are consistent to all sub-images, but others are not, and they are related in some way due to the physical properties of the materials and the illumination. And we somehow need to enter this knowledge to the reconstruction process. In order to do so, we use the framework of image reconstruction using plug-and-play denoiser as image prior. In several previous works, an image denoiser was used as a projection operator to the manifold of desired images. So iteratively using steps of model-based inversion and then denoising operation, we can achieve very good reconstruction results with the power of both model-based inversion and deep image prior using some deep denoiser trained in parallel. So as a denoiser, we take some variation of unit. We train it using several polarization image datasets that are available and another dataset that we are generating and plan also to release in the following. And here you can see initial result of the same scene with the screen backlight and the plastic materials. On the top, you see the 4 polarization images reconstructed using from the diffused and multiplexed image. And on the bottom, you see conventional images using a lensed camera for reference. Just to note, these are still not full experimental results since we don't have the filter yet. So we took the 4 different polarization images and composed the multiplexed using the 4 polarization in 4 angles and the diffuser. And then we multiplexed them in simulation and fed the diffused and multiplexed image to the reconstruction algorithm. And you can see if we'll zoom in, you see that we can reconstruct these color transitions, and they are consistent to the lens camera reference. And also the transition of the background light is different due to the angle of polarization. So as I mentioned, this is still under work, and we have several extensions both to complete the full experimental results, and we plan to add some more extension to the optics for more complex results. So I hope we will be able to present these results soon. And thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Shai. Do we have questions from the audience? Yeah.
Hi, very nice. The diffuser itself doesn't introduce, so if it's, in the diffuser can work, they use masking tape or something very cheap. So that does not introduce on its own birefringence. Maybe you can exploit it, I don't know.
Yeah. Great question. I was hoping no one will ask it. Generally, in this configuration, we tried to overcome these issues, but in the next steps, we want to take advantage of them as part of the compression or part of the coding process. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Any more? Don't be shy. I have a question. You are allowed to design any kind of polarization multiplexing filter you want. Is this the best way to go? Like, for example, do you really need 4 of them, 4 different directions, because you're doing regularization anyway? Is this the right order to place them, and so on?
Yeah, it's just a simple example. Generally, we want to examine more complicated designs. Specifically here, we wanted to do something very, very simple that potentially we can do on our own in the lab as some sort of, because the group at Berkeley presented how you can generate your own diffuser camera with your own very, very simple elements in your lab. So we want to somehow generate something similar to this, if we'll be able to do so. So we tried a very simple configuration of a filter.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if that's it, let's thank Shai again. Our next speaker is Chen Bar from the Technion, and Chen is a PhD student in Anat Levin's group in electrical engineering in the Technion. At some point, Dr. Marina Alterman will be joining him in the presentation. She's also a researcher in Anat Levin's group. And the title of the talk is Single Scattering Modeling of Speckle Correlations.
Okay, thank you, Yoav. And the work is about single scattering modeling of speckle correlations. Of course, I want also to thank to Anat and Yanis for this work. So when we shine a laser beam on a scattering material, we get a noise-like speckle patterns. These patterns have strong statistical properties, such as the memory effect, meaning that the speckle shift as we see the illumination beam producing it. These statistical properties are not very understood, in large part due to the lack of tractable models for simulating them. In this work, we introduce a simple analytical model for speckle statistics and show that it is significantly more accurate than previous models. Modeling speckle statistics is important because of the large variety of speckle-based imaging techniques. One example is the imaging through scattering work of cats and colleagues. The goal is to recover a clear image of fluorescent sources that is hidden behind a scattering layer. The speckle memory effect makes it possible to remove the effect of scattering by simply compute the autocorrelation of the speckle image. An analytical model for speckle statistics can help us investigate for what types of material this procedure will succeed. Another application of speckle statistics is in adaptive optic focusing. The goal is to change the shape of a wavefront so that when it passes through a scattering layer, it will focus into a sharp spot, as if the scattering layer was not there. Finding the wavefront shape needed to achieve focusing is a difficult calibration procedure, which normally needs to be done separately for each point inside the volume. The speckle memory effect makes it possible to change an already adjusted wavefront shape so that it will focus on nearby points within some small range. Our model, analytical model for speckle statistics can help us investigate on how large this refocusing range is and what wavefront adjustment can increase its size. These and other important applications have motivated the development of a few techniques for modeling speckle statistics. One category of techniques focus on exact simulators. However, exact simulations remain computationally expensive, even when using advanced computer graphics techniques. Additionally, as simulations are done numerically, these techniques do not lend themselves to theoretical analysis. Another category of techniques focus on developing closed-form but approximate models for speckle statistics. Our work falls under this category and draws inspiration from already closely related models for incoherent intensity images. Let's focus on two opposite extreme cases, very thick and very thin materials. We characterize the optical thickness of the material as the optical depth, which is the average number of scattering events on a path. With this in mind, the first analytical model is based on the diffusion approximation, where light scatters a large number of times. The other approximation is based on the single scattering approximation, where we assume that the light scatters only one time. There have been a lot of prior work toward adapting models based on the diffusion approximation to the case of the speckle correlations. Similar to the case of the incoherent intensity, these models only hold for very thick materials. However, the memory effect for such materials is very weak, and therefore these techniques are usually not very useful in practice. In this work, we introduce a simple analytical model for speckle statistics that based on the single scattering approximation. In contrast to the case of the incoherent intensity situation, when considering a speckle statistics, this approximation also holds for optical depths that larger than 1. To understand what we are trying to evaluate, consider the following setup. We illuminate a scattering layer from direction I1, resulting in a scattered field. We do the same from another direction, I2. According to the memory effect, the two scattered fields should be correlated to each other. To quantify this correlation, let's select two viewing directions, V1 and V2, and look at the expected product of the field scattered from I1 toward V1 and the field scattered from I2 toward V2. We call this the speckle covariance. The expectation is taken over different realizations of materials with the same scattering parameters. If the two illuminators and the viewing directions are the same, the covariance is just the intensity of the field. To understand how we can model this covariance, we can start from classical results from the optics literature, which state that we can express the covariance as an integral over pairs of light paths through the scattering layer. To make this concrete, let's consider two paths. One is beginning from light 1 and ending at view 1, and another starting from light 2 and ending at view 2. Each path has a complex contribution U, which expresses the amplitude and the phase of the path. In particular, the phase of the path is proportional to its length. The product of two such complex path contributions is also a complex number, with a phase proportional to the difference of the two paths' lengths. And of course, we have many such path pairs. Since the contribution is complex, let's plot it as a point in the complex plane. To get a covariance, we need to average this pairwise complex contribution over all path pairs. However, as we are averaging complex number, they tend to cancel each other, and thus the average approaches to 0. Based on this observation, we proved in our prior work that we can significantly simplify this model by considering only path pairs that share all their vertices and differ only on 4 vertices, on 4 segments connecting the path to the illumination and viewing directions. With this restriction, the central segment of the two paths have the same length, and thus their phases are more consistent. In this work, we know that even after we restrict our path pairs to share all their vertices, they still differ in 4 segments, which may differ in length, resulting in complex contributions with highly varying phases. One way to ensure that all path pairs have the same phase is to consider a situation where I1 equals to I2 and V1 equals to V2. In this case, all pairs contribute 0 phase, and the covariance becomes the intensity of the field. But non-zero covariance exists in other configurations. In particular, we can identify a large family of path pairs with a consistent phases in the following way. We consider illumination and viewing directions where the difference between I1 to I2 is equal to the difference between V1 and V2. And we only consider paths that only scatters one time. We can show that all these single scattering path pairs contribute throughput with a fixed phase, and therefore the sum in a constructive way, generating non-zero covariance. What we argue in this work is that we can approximate most of the covariance we observe in practice using only these single scattering paths, and thus we can ignore longer paths. The main advantage of this approximation is that it allows us to compute the covariance in a closed form, without the need for numerical tools such as Monte Carlo rendering. This closed form expression can be simplified to depend only on two angles: the angle delta between the illumination directions and the scattering angle tau between the illumination and viewing directions. The expression also depends on the thickness L of the material and on its material parameters. And then
okay, thanks, Ren. So now I will show you what this closed form model can do. So to evaluate the projections of this closed form approximation, we compared it to our exact Monte Carlo covariance rendering. So we plot the covariance as a function of angle delta between two illuminating directions. You can see in blue the exact covariance, and in yellow you can see the single scattering model. So if this angle delta is 0, two directions coincide, and we get that the covariance equals the intensity of the field, and you can see that they do not match. It is actually well known that due to multiple scattering, single scattering is not a good approximation for intensity. However, as we increase delta, the single scattering approximation becomes accurate. The reason for that is that all these multiply scattered paths have highly varying phases, and they do not contribute to the covariance. And this range of angles delta is actually an interesting range for many applications that we list in the paper. Now, this single scattering model is also accurate for thicker materials. For example, here, optical depth 3, where in average, the paths have 3 scattering events. And as expected, for very thick materials, the covariance is just 0. So then we compared our single scattering model also with the diffusion model that you can see here in pink. So as we've seen, the diffusion model applies mostly for very thick materials, and therefore its predictions are too pessimistic here for smaller optical depths, always predicting just 0 covariance. And the diffusion becomes accurate only at very thick materials, but there the covariance is 0 anyway. So now we discussed the dependence on angle delta between two illuminating directions. And now let's look at angle tau, the scattering angle. Okay, so both the diffusion model and other prior analytical models have considered only the dependency on the angle delta. But we've seen in our lab measurements that the covariance also depends on the scattering angle tau. And this model is the only model that we are aware of that can predict this dependency. So you can see in the equation that the model depends on the phase function of the material. And here in this simulation, we use the phase function of a tissue, which is highly forward scattering. And this means that the correlation decays very quickly for larger scattering angles. Now, this has a very important implication when we image materials that we are not familiar with, because we can easily read the phase function directly from the covariance measurement. And this can also be done for thicker optical depths where most of the paths scattered multiple times. So in the paper, we discuss other new properties that our model reveals and their potential utility for computational imaging applications. Now, in particular, our model can better explain the tilt shift property of the covariance discussed in Osnabrück et al. So due to lack of time, I won't get into details with this. I will only show you that they conducted lab experiments in this paper and measured covariance, producing this double wedge shape. So our single scattering model can better explain this double wedge shape than the analytical model that they present in their paper to explain the lab measurements. So to summarize this talk, we introduced an analytic model for speckle covariance based on the single scattering approximation. Unlike the intensity case, our model can explain speckle covariance even for thicker materials, where most of the paths scattered multiple times. The reason for that is that all these multiply scattered paths have very different phases, and they interfere destructively and do not contribute to the covariance. This single scattering model can better explain different properties of speckles, statistical properties, and even reveal new ones better than prior analytical models. And for its simplicity, we believe it can be very useful for various computational imaging applications. So thank you for listening, and please see details in our paper.
Thank you, Marina. Is this on? Yes. We have time for one very, very quick question because we're really late. Okay.
Yeah, just a quick question because we're late on time. Very nice work. Thanks very much for the presentation. So it's known that the diffusion approximation is good for when the medium thickness is larger than the transport mean free path. And do you know the limit for more or less for your approximation? Is it like 0.1 transport mean free path?
So this approximation will be accurate for some kind of, here you can see, it will be accurate for some kind of delta. Now, even for very thick materials, it becomes eventually accurate, but the problem is that, as you can see, the single scattering becomes more and more tiny when the optical depth of the material is increases. So it becomes accurate, but eventually the correlation will be zero anyway. It won't be interesting. And this is actually what we argue, that for the diffusion approximation, this holds for very, very tiny angles. And therefore, we also think that most of the times, this approximation also is not very useful. The diffusion approximation is not very useful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's thank our speakers again, Marina and Chen. Our final speaker for the session is Judith Fisher. Judith is a master's student in Tali Treibis group in the Department of Marine Technologies in the University of Haifa, very close to here, right? Previously, she received her bachelor's degree from the University of Bremerhaven in Germany. And the talk title is Computationally Extended Depth of Field for Microscopy-On-the-Go.
Can I close the computer? Yes. Because I'm using my own.
Yes. Do you need the mouse?
No, I'm good. Okay, I'm Judith Fischer, and I'm a master's student in the Marine Technologies Department here in the University of Haifa. And today I want to present our work about computationally extended depth of field for Microscopy-On-the-Go, joint work with Aviad Avni and Tali Treibis. And we asked the question, how can you acquire microscopic images in a dynamic underwater environment as underwater? And especially after the talk this morning of Dan Oren, we know how important it is to image living organisms underwater. In the beginning, I just want to give a very short overview of the talk, and then I'll go more into depth. So here you can see a microscopic image, and you can see that in a single plane, we don't have much of information in focus. If I would change the focus plane, what we saw before in focus appears now out of focus. A method to overcome this problem and to extend the depth of field is focal stacking. But a focal stack usually takes a long time, and in a dynamic environment, it might result in motion blur. Therefore, a one-shot is suggested, and a one-shot is a focal stack taken during one exposure. And in this way, we can shorten acquisition time. Since the one-shot is blurry, it needs to be post-processed, and previous methods suggested simple deblurring using restricting assumptions, which led to a limited range. Therefore, we suggest using a deep neural network to overcome this problem, and we can present results with a 10-fold increase in the depth of field and a very short acquisition time. So more for the details. Here you can see a single frame image with a very shallow depth of field. And this single plane image corresponds to the lowest focal plane of our depth of field target here. Now, as I said, a focal stack is usually taken to extend the depth of field, and a focal stack is a sequence of images which are taken during a focal stack. For each plane, a single image is taken. But we can see here that this results in a very long acquisition time. All these single plane images can, in the end, be merged together into one single image. We suggest using a one-shot since we want to image living organisms in a dynamic environment, and a focal stack would lead to motion blur maybe. Therefore, we suggest using a one-shot, which is a sequence of focal planes at the same exposure time. Means that the shutter of the camera stays open while we are scanning the object. And in this way, we can have a way shorter acquisition time. But the image we get from the focal stacks from the one-shot is blurry, and we need post-processing to recover the image. Before I go into the deblurring part, I would like to introduce our optical setup. And our optical setup consists out of a machine vision camera, a telecentric lens, and a camera tube. And before the telecentric lens, we are placing an electrical focus tunable lens. In our setup, we used an Optotune. And the electrical focus tunable lens works in a way that it changes its curvature with the current you are giving it. And this way, we can change the focal planes in a very fast way. We have an illumination system which consists out of LEDs which are focused through a Fresnel lens. The illumination, the image capture, and the change in focal plane is synchronized by a microcontroller. As a short reminder, why we are using a telecentric lens. And in a standard lens, an object in different distances will appear in different sizes on the camera sensor. Therefore, we are using a telecentric lens in order to have equal magnification throughout the stack because we have objects in many different distances. And here we can see that with a telecentric lens, both objects in different distances will appear in the same size. Because of the telecentricity in the system, previous one-shot methods assumed a depth-independent blur. And with a depth-independent blur, this means that the blur is spatially invariant, and simple deblurring methods can be used to deblur the one-shot image. And these previous methods were able to extend the depth of field from like 10 to 20 times. But this is a limiting assumption since the telecentricity breaks over a large range, and even the Optotune application note is stating this. You can overcome this problem by using a 4F relay system, but most microscopic setups don't allow this setup. Therefore, we suggest using a deep neural network to overcome this problem, and we are able to extend a large depth of field. We thought of using in the beginning just a naive approach was to use a pre-trained network already. And here we can see that We used the scale recurrent network for deep image deblurring, and this network was trained on motion blur originally. And we can see here that just using the original weights didn't improve our image. That's why we needed to go back and needed to retrain our our network. And that's why we went to simulate a training set with Gaussian blur. So we took natural sharp images from data sets of Middlebury and also an underwater image set taken by our lab, and we blurred these images with different Gaussian kernels. And this resulted in varying images with varying blur. And we trained our network with this data set. And also here we can see that the Gaussian blur doesn't really represent the blur we have in our system, since we are not able to recover any details. So we need to find the blur which happens in our system. Therefore, we made a simulation in ZMAX and Optical Studio for exactly our system with a telecentric lens, the OptoTune, and the camera sensor. Because we needed to understand how does an object look like in our one-shot image. If the object appears in our in-focus plane, it will appear in focus, but once we start moving out of focus in our one-shot, the object will appear out of focus. And what we did in order to simulate the blur of the one-shot is that we averaged all these in and out of focus plane into one blur kernel for this specific in-focus plane. And this gave us the one-shot for this plane. What we did now is that we simulated the blur kernel for each single in-focus plane. This is just another simulation for another distance, and you can see that it's different. Through the simulation, we found out that the blur depends on the object distance. This is the blur at the end of our range, and this is how the blur appears in the beginning of our range. Therefore, here you can again see like the difference between the last plane, the first plane, and therefore we simulated 42 different blur kernels for our system. Again, we went back to creating a new data set with our natural sharp images from before, and we blurred all those images with our 42 blur kernels and trained our network again. And here you can actually see that now this training worked for our setup, because when we compared again to the Gaussian blur before, nothing happened. In our newly trained network, we were able to even recover like small details. Since we are having now a blurred image and a simulated blur kernel, previous methods said that we could use simple deblurring. But also this didn't work. We were able to recover a small range, but it's not comparable to the range we were able to recover with the trained network. This is an example of one of our scenes taken in our lab, and here you can see again the single plane, where we have not much in focus and a lot out of focus. This is the one shot we took for this scene, and this is our recovered image. And you can see here that we recovered a depth of field of over 30 times from the original depth of field. For a comparison, we always took a focal stack of the same scene just in order to evaluate our reconstruction. Since our original idea was to image living organisms underwater, we also wanted to test our system underwater in situ. And here you can see our underwater setup. In the left, it is out of the housing, and on the right side, you can see me diving with the microscope, and the microscope is placed on a tripod, and I can steer it through an underwater screen. This is one of the results taken in Elad in situ, and here you can see the arms of a coral, a polyp of a coral. Again, the single plane image, our one-shot image, and the image we were able to recover. For this scene, we were able to recover over 15 times of the depth of field. This is the focal stack as a comparison. This scene is a very good example for motion blur and why we are doing this. This is again the single plane with very few areas in focus. This is our one-shot image, and this is our recovered image. And if you compare this image to the focal stack, you really can see the motion blur. Concluding, I would like to say that we were able to extend a large range for the extended depth of field, and we are able to image moving organisms in situ or on moving platforms. For future work, we consider working on depth reconstruction since the blur kernel is depth dependent, and another topic or point would be noise handling, since with a shorter acquisition time, more noise is apparent in the images. We are working right now on a paper, and additional data and information will be available soon on our website. Thank you very much for your attention, and you're welcome for any questions.
Thank you very much, Judith. Do we have questions from the audience? Quick questions with quick answers? Or any questions?
Great talk, great results. Really enjoyed it. Could you comment how does it compare to, say, a cubic phase modulation? So there are other sort of modulation for extended depth of field. So is there any comparison with the?
I don't know, actually. Like, we looked into other one-shot simulations, but I can't comment on any other ones right now.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, more questions? No? Okay, thank you very much, Judith.
Thank you.
Thank you again. So, okay, this was the last talk of this session. Next up is a coffee break. Life is full of compromises, and we will have to cut the coffee break a bit short because we're late. So we will meet here again at 4:50. Okay, 10 to 5.
The 2021 Gather.Town space. This is a virtual.
כן, אני התחברתי. כן, כן, הייתה תמונה, פשוט סגרתי אותו כי הוא לא מחובר לחשמל.
נכון, לסגר לך על הזמן.
לא, היא תציג אותי או ש...
מה שאת רוצה. אתה נותן לאנשים עוד להיכנס? Okay, the last people are welcome to join us. We want to start. So before I'll introduce our next keynote speaker, just want to tell you all that we have a great lineup ahead with great talks, and I encourage you all to stay with us until the very end of this day. If you are worried about dinner, so we have great restaurants on the beach, and if you have a ride home, we also have sandwiches that will be here at the very end of the session. And now it's my great honor to present the next keynote speaker, Lihi Zelnik-Manor. Lihi received their BSc in mechanical engineering from the Technion, and then MSc and also a PhD from Weizmann with honor. She has a great contribution. She has made a great contribution to the computer vision community as a very active member of all the big conference program committees. Just to mention a few of them, so she's been area chair at CVPR and ECCV, program chair at CVPR 16. She was part of the award committees in both ACCV 18 and CVPR 19. She's now the general chair of the upcoming CVPR in a month, and she will be also the general chair at ECCV 22 in Tel Aviv.
In Tel Aviv.
So if you are considering organizing a conference, Lihi is the one to consult with.
Thank you, Tamar. You can go off.
And today she will discuss the challenges of making AI research into a product in her talk, Computer Vision Research for Massively Used Cloud Drive Apps.
Thank you. Thank you, Tamar. It's such a pleasure to be here, everyone. So a nice introduction. Okay, so we're short of time, right to business. So indeed, I'm going to talk about computer vision research. Over the past 2.5 years, here are pictures. I've been with Alibaba and on leave from the Technion, founding an R&D center for Alibaba in Israel. And maybe if you look at it might seem a little bit odd, but as Tamara said, I started my career in mechanical engineering, switched to computer science or math at Weizmann, and then electrical engineering at the Technion. So I'm one of those people that want to enjoy everything and want to continue learning all the time. And as part of that journey, I decided to spend a few years experience how things look like from the industry side. And in this talk today, I want to talk about this connection between research and real products, which is something that maybe some of you already knew. For me, this was new, and I felt that this is a good topic for this community. I'll tell you first a little bit about Alibaba, because I think maybe here in Israel and maybe some of the other listeners online are not familiar with the full ecosystem. So Alibaba, many of us know it for retail. And in Israel, AliExpress is very famous, but this is just a small business unit. The entire digital economy of Alibaba is based on Alibaba Cloud, which is the third biggest cloud in the world. And on top of that, there are other platforms like Ant Financial Alipay, which is the payment platform that serves the organization, Alimama, which is the marketing and services, China, which is the logistics, and then the verticals. That's where the commerce come in. So within China, Taobao is the biggest, and Tmall is where you sell international brands to China. But there are also other verticals. So for example, if you go to China, there's no YouTube, you use Youku. There's no Expedia, you use Fliggy. You don't use Google Maps, you use A-Maps, and so forth. It continues. So you can see this whole breadth of products that Alibaba provides to the community. And the team here in Israel is part of Alibaba Cloud, part of an organization called Damo Academy, which is the organization that does research for advanced technologies. And specifically in the team in Israel, this is our focus. We want to do real applications. We want to handle real users. We want to handle real AI challenges to create value. And one of our slogans is to do research for profit and fun. And maybe this word profit seems a little bit obscene to some of you who are dedicated to academia and research. But I see profit as a way to evaluate if I created value to people. If people are paying for my product, I've done something useful for them. So I think this is a good driver for research. And also fun. So fun is always a part of the deal for me. So what are we doing at this center in Israel? Drive. So what do I mean by drive? So specifically, we're working on an application that is a Drive product. How many of you use Google Drive? Yay. Thumbs up to you. And others, Apple, iCloud, right? Anyone uses Baidu Wangpang? Okay, so you're in the West, so you're familiar with the Google and Apple products, but in China, if you go to China, you'll find Baidu Wangpan or Tencent's Weiyun. So, and these are the products from Baidu and Tencent, and now Alibaba is also launching or has launched a similar product in that category. And why am I going to tell you about this? Because the team in Israel is developing the AI behind this product, and also I think it is totally cool. So I think Drive products are going to continue and become more and more popular and create value for people. And it's a product that is at the palm of your hand. It's in your mobile phone. It serves billions of people. So when you create AI for Drive product, millions or maybe billions of people are going to use your algorithm, this model that you trained. I think it's totally cool. And so this is what we're doing. And if you look into the future, so for example, I think my prediction is that we'll see more and more things happening on the cloud. So for example, this is a product called Weiying. Not sure I'm pronouncing correctly the name, which is a personal computer by Alibaba Cloud. That the vision or the dream is that you'll just have a device that connects to cloud, and not only your data will be on cloud, like in a Drive product, most of your data is on cloud, but also the computation will happen on cloud. And you will have everything at your pocket. So you can check this out on AliZilla, which is the website where Alibaba presents the cool stuff that's happening there. So let's say hello to our Drive product. So what capabilities can we give you? You cannot try it because it's only available in China. So I have some screenshots for you. So just like other Drive products, and I'm focusing on the photos and videos part. So you can have all your photos and videos nicely organized in a way that is nice to look at. You have albums automatically created for you, like all the photos of cats or your friends, or albums based on location. Let's see if this works. You can search. So you can see here, we're searching for Tian, which is a goddess, or we can search for Ren, which is a person, and find all the photos or videos according to the search. So this is one of the benefits of Drive product. And you can also have fun stuff like memories. This is from, on the right, you will see a memory from 2 years ago, a yacht sailing with some friends from Alibaba. This is me with the hat. And nice memories created for you, and you can guess how memories like this, if they were created for me, they would totally empower my social life. I'm not that good at it, so it would be cool to share such things. So this is everything we do. And, well, not everything we do. This is some of the things we do. Now, why am I talking about this here? So I'm a computer vision person, and the technology behind it is computer vision. And specifically, I'll talk today a lot about multi-label classification, which is one of the core technologies behind everything you saw. And I will try to highlight the aspects of the gap between research and product. So there are many gaps, there are many challenges. Anyone here working for a company trying to productize knows the gaps. I'll focus just on two of them. One of them is that we're handling real-world data. And the other one is that we need to adhere to multiple objectives. So what does that mean? I will give examples throughout the talk, but real-world data is going to be imbalanced. It's going to be noisy. I cannot control it. I might not have enough data for training. Multiple objectives. My models have to be accurate, of course, fast, of course, low resources. They cannot consume the phone battery. I need to comply to all the objectives. I cannot decide that, okay, let's assume that we have infinite compute. I cannot make those assumptions. This is going to run on mobile phones of millions of people. So I'll focus on those two aspects and how we solve them. And I'll start with what might seem like a cliche, but how can we shrink this gap? The first thing is you need the right team. And the right team, of course, yeah, you need great people. Everybody knows that. But I think it's even beyond. We need to have people of different types. So we need to have the researchers, those people who are really enthusiastic about cool mathematical optimization problems. You need to have the algo engineers, I would call them, or people that they want to do deep learning, they know how to train models, but they're excited about productization, and that's their drive. You need to have software engineers that will make things run fast and smooth and have the infrastructure for production. You need good product managers and project manager and an excellent designer to design the product. Without the full pipeline, it's not going to work. It's not enough that even if you have the best in the world classification, you try and put it in the product, might not work. So you need to end-to-end close this whole circle of development. So having said that, I will not talk about how you recruit people and how you build a team, but if you want, you can talk to me afterwards. But because we've done this very well at Alibaba, but I'll talk more about the research problems and the things that probably relate a little bit more to the people here. And I'll start with looking at the challenges of real-world data. And as I said, specifically the problem of multi-label classification. So what is multi-label classification? We're given images, and our goal is to be able to identify multiple objects or assign multiple labels to this image. So for example, for this image, I want to be able to say that there is an orange here, there are glasses, there is some water somewhere. Not sure why I said water. There is a candle. There are people here. But there's also a mistake, like I said, I marked a cat. There's no cat here. Now, why have I done that? So the challenge with real-world data is that when you talk about multi-label classification, is that by definition, you're going to suffer from huge class imbalance. So if you have a long list of, let's say you want to recognize just 4,000 types of objects that people might have. How many of them will appear in this image? Just a few. So by construction of the problem, most of the labels for this image are going to be negative, and only few are going to be positive. So you have this huge class imbalance in training data. And then there are labeling mistakes. So why did I mark here a cat? You ask human annotators to annotate all the labels for such a picture, they're bound to make mistakes. It's an exhausting task. So what do you do with this? So here comes the methods, a little bit into algorithms. So we try to solve this, and I promise to be fast. So I'll skip a few slides. I'll start from here. So here's an example of a picture and from the open images dataset, and it has two positive labels, which are person and camera, and 78 negative labels. Okay, most of the labels just don't appear in this image, and a bottle is missing, for example, and should have been marked. So this is just to show there are labeling mistakes in the data by construction. And what we want to be able to do is train a network, and we've tried to use standard training with the standard method to use is to train it with the loss function, which is called the cross entropy. And we also tried other loss functions, but none of them worked. And the reason they don't work is that what you want is a loss function that follows the green curve you see here. So what does this green curve provide us? It has several properties. First of all, it is continuous. So this is important. I should highlight the axis here. So what we're looking here in this graph, on the x-axis is the probability of the negative labels, and the y-axis is the gradient of the loss that we want to have. And what we want to see is the gradient of the loss. We're looking at the gradient of the loss because this is the thing that you actually propagate in your network when you do the training. What we want to have is the ability to threshold and completely, or threshold almost to zero, all those negative samples that have low probability. We don't trust them. So we want it to be kind of very low in this region. We also want to attenuate the samples that come in with very high probability. The reason here is because, as I told you, there are lots of labeling mistakes. So often when you see very high probability, it's just a mistake. It's not a true label. So we want to have thresholding at the highest probabilities, thresholding the lowest probabilities. You want to have continuity, and then you also want to somehow put focus on the positive samples. If you have only 2 positive labels and 78 negative labels, you want those 2 to somehow come up and dominate the training. Otherwise, the negative ones will dominate it, and it will not converge. So we were able to do this by proposing a loss function, which we call the asymmetric loss. This loss function is basically based on the log probability of the labels, but it has some nonlinearities that create this green curve that I mentioned. So I'm going a little bit fast over this, but you can go on and read a paper. It's there on arXiv, and you can see what we get. But these are the 2 key ideas. So focus on positive samples and remove the easy negatives and the outliers. So 2 key ideas that give us a loss function that, if you look at results, what it gives you a very good multi-label classification, state-of-the-art results. So we tested on Pascal, on MS Coco, and on NuSwide, and on all of them, what you see in blue is the previously known state-of-the-art, and in red is our method where we just took one architecture and trained it with this loss function that we proposed, whereas in blue, each one of them is a different paper, a different method. So we get, I think, we get state-of-the-art results in multi-label classification under those imbalanced situations. And it also works in practice. So this is just a screenshot from my phone, all the albums that were automatically created for me. And you can see here some examples of flowers that I took or were sent to me. And this album was automatically created for me using this algorithm. So all we had to do is actually change the loss function, and we're doing much better in terms of the data imbalance. Another aspect that I think is very important when it comes to data is the understanding that real-world data is not necessarily what you find in benchmarks. I think this is something that the industry should help with and contribute to the research community. And to stand behind these words, I'll present 2 initiatives that we have launched that are, their main purpose is contribution to the community. So one of them is a workshop, Retail Vision, that was run in CVPR 2020 and will run again in CVPR 2021. And in this workshop, which is joint with Trax and this year also with Facebook, we are providing 2 benchmarks, one of them with images of products, products like in online sales, and the other one from Trax, products on shelves. And these are huge benchmarks. So for example, the Ali products benchmark has 3 million images of 50,000 different products. And these are real images. So this is a real-world scenario, and we're trying to help promote research in those directions that are more practical. Another contribution we are making, you can find this on ImageNet. So I know if some of you might know, the original ImageNet dataset was not 1K, but rather 21K categories. And it's just a huge dataset with, you can see here, over 14 million images. And people are not using this dataset, I think, mostly because it is not easy to use. It's lots of data, hard to download, hard to process. So what we've done, we've processed it for the community, and now we collaborated with ImageNet and posted it there. You can also find it on our GitHub. So we took the data set and we processed it, which made what it meant is cleaning invalid classes, defining a train test validation set that were not defined and made it difficult to benchmark. We standardized the image size, etc. So now the data set is available on ImageNet and you can download it. Another thing we've done, which required a little bit deeper dive, is not just data processing, but rather looking at the data set and understanding that, again, the labeling is difficult. So what do I mean by that? You see here example of two images from the data set, rather similar images, but one of them was labeled as animal, while the other one was labeled as cow. Now, the reason for the difference is that the way the images were annotated, the annotator selected one label from a hierarchy of 11 deep hierarchy. So some annotators chose animal, others chose cow. You can see another example for this image here on the right. The original label is tunic. But it could also have been cloak or overgarment or garment or clothing or artifact. So what do you do with this? So we've tried actually three methods. One method we tried to train with as like single label classification according to the original label. We've tried multi-label classification using the method that I just told you about with this asymmetric loss function. And then we found out that actually what worked best was an in-between approach where we take all the labels in the hierarchy, but rather than training in a multi-label setup, we train it in a single label setup, but using a loss function, which is a sum over the softmax over the entire hierarchy. So our loss function is a weighted sum of the loss function, and each loss function is a cross-entropy loss for that hierarchy level. So essentially, you can think of each image could have potentially 11 labels, but they're not considered as multi-label, but rather the losses are summed. And also some knowledge distillation always helps. Doing this, I'll focus on the results on the right. We get significant improvement. So the blue curve is what you get when you train with ImageNet 1K, the standard one everybody is used to. The red curve is what you get with ImageNet 21K. The x-axis here are different architectures. So we took 5 different architectures in this case: MobileNet v3, ResNet 50, Alpha 595, TResNet M, and TResNet L. 5 different architectures. Each of them we pre-trained once on ImageNet 1K, once on ImageNet 21K, and then we tested on a downstream task. So this graph shows results for iNaturalist. And you can see that just consistently for this data set, for all those different architectures, using the pre-training on the 21K leads to a significant improvement. The graph on the table on the left shows you that this is not just for iNaturalist. So for even on ImageNet 1K, on iNaturalist, on Food 251, CFR 100, MS Coco, Pascal, and Kinetics 200, on all those data sets, training using the fine-tuning using the pre-train from ImageNet 21K gives you a boost. So this is why we decided to release this to the community and make it accessible. So this is one of the ways. So again, looking at closing the gap between research and practice, real-world data. So we try, what can we do with this? How can we close the gap? So one thing is release such data to the community so people can work on this and make progress together. And the other thing is find the methods that treat the data as it is. So deal with the imbalance, deal with the noise. The other aspect of that you need to go to production is to handle multiple objectives. So for example, as I said, we're thinking about drive apps. As I said, our algorithms have to be fast, low in memory, high accuracy, low power consumption. I cannot just choose one of those objectives. I have to comply to all of them. And my models are going to run on CPUs, on mobile low end, on mobile phone high end, and maybe with various operating systems and who knows what. And I might have to run many different computer vision tasks, like video summaries, video highlights, image quality, etc. So I need a way to find the right architecture for each composition. So today, the poster session, Niv and Jonathan, who are here at the audience, presented the work, and I'll just summarize it very quickly in one slide, where you're given a target device, you're given a target latency, and you need to output an architecture that complies with both strictly. So you want to maximize the accuracy and strictly comply to the target latency. And the way they do it is in 3 stages. The first stage, they train a super network. And this super network is trained in a way that its sub-networks have high accuracy. They also prepare a latency calculator, which is kind of like based on a lookup table, but where you calculate the cost, the computational cost of each computing block in the super network a priori on all the possible devices you might have, and then you can in real time very quickly compute the latency for each architecture. So after you have your super network and you have a way to calculate the latency, then comes the optimization part, and this is where the cool mathematicians should have fun, and I encourage you to go read the paper, because if you want to extract a sub-architecture from the super network, you can do this by defining the objective function and optimizing it with a block coordinate stochastic Frank-Wolf algorithm. Very elegant solution. And this whole thing takes just 7 GPU hours per model. And then always after you have your architecture, you use some knowledge distillation and fine-tuning to get the best accuracy for that architecture, which takes extra 8 GPU hours. So altogether, if you look at our results, let's start from this table on the right. Our results gives us a total cost of 400 GPU hours for training the super networks, and then for each new network, 15 hours, which is much faster than previous solution. You might know there's a work by Tsai et al. Called Once for All that required 1,200 hours of pre-training and then 25 hours for each new model. In addition, they do not comply to the latency constraint accurately. And you can see in this graph, x-axis is the latency, y-axis is the accuracy, and you can see the red curve with our results comparing to many different efficient algorithms. And you can see that you vector search method, we get state-of-the-art results on any latency constraint, and now you can give us the latency you want for 49 milliseconds, 53 milliseconds, we'll give you the architecture. So beautiful work by Niv and Jonathan, and you can still ask them questions afterwards, they're here. And then maybe last, because I have 3 more minutes. So last is another work that we recently published, how to deal with video. So again, video is by definition very time-consuming. So how do you do this efficiently? And the reason I chose to present this work is, well, this previous work, this one, required very sophisticated optimization algorithm. You don't see it on this slide, but this Frank-Wolf algorithm and the whole setup, it's very complex. The other extreme, what we've done with video is very simple. Very simple. We took the transformer work and essentially added a temporal attention layer. So in spatial transformers, spatial visual transformers, you take 16 by 16 image patches, you sample them, you pass them through the transformer, and you get a representation for that image. So what we've done with video, we selected 16 frames, just because then we had a very cool name for our paper, which is an image is worth 16 by 16 words. What is a video worth? What's the answer? 16 frames. So we thought it's cool, just 16 frames. We sample from the video. This is on the kinetics data set. Okay, so if you had maybe other types of the video, you might need other sampling. But on the kinetics data set, at least, this suffices. You take just 16 frames and you pass each frame through a spatial transformer, and then the output goes into a temporal transformer. And this very simple solution works extremely well, and just wanted to put on stage the great advantages of simple solutions that give you great results. And the results you can see here, the x-axis is the videos per second, so the speed of processing and the accuracy. And our results are here at the top, marked in red. So our algorithm is called Space-Time Attention Model, STAM. Only Hebrew speakers understand the fun of this, but this is what we chose. And this is comparison to other state-of-the-art methods. They got the big circles not because they're better, but rather because this is the number of frames they're processing. And you can see that the fact that we have tiny small dots means that we require much less resources. And the number of frames is also important because if you think that your video is stored on cloud and you need to maybe extract it, we didn't put that into the calculation here. This is just the actual processing of the video. But this might even save us more time in practice. So I will wrap up. I'm just 30 seconds late. What is the gap between AI research and practice? So we talked about real-world data, and we've talked about multiple objectives. So we need to be both accurate and fast and practical. Sometimes you choose very sophisticated solutions. Sometimes you choose very simple solutions. You choose what you need to get the job done. You choose what you need to make it work. So this was the message I tried to convey, and I hope that you will think that Cloud Drive apps are awesome. I hope you see them as cool. They create real value for users, and they bring with them real-world challenges in AI and computer vision. Not just computer vision, also language and audio are coming in. So it's just fun to develop and work on what's behind it. And I slightly mentioned it in terms of the data, but I think if you talk about research and practice and you talk about industry and academia, different roles are being played here. And I think if you are in industry, please help in the ways that you can to contribute to the research community. Research community is a collaborative effort across the world. If we contribute data sets, we contribute benchmarks, we promote research on those directions, which is good for everybody. So I encourage more people to do that, just like we've been doing. And I will end here and take questions.
Yeah, thank you, Lihi. If you have questions, you are welcome to raise your hand, and you'll have a mic soon. I have a general question. So as someone who has the perspective of both academia and the industry, so we are seeing now that the relation between the two is getting more and more close. How do you see that develop in the next few years? What is the next step of that?
Okay, so I'm not sure I'm good about predictions, but I would say what I would like to see. So at least in my view, the industry and academia have complementary and different roles. Some of them are overlap. Some of them are in their intersection. But the place where they differ, academia has the privilege of looking into the longer term. And not the privilege, but actually the duty to look into the longer terms. Companies will invest in areas where they see value coming in the near future. Now, what is near? For some companies, they can only invest. Is this appeared? Is it working? Okay. Okay. So some companies can only look 1 year ahead, and some companies can look 5 years ahead. I don't think companies will invest 20 years ahead. Very rare. Academia does that. So deep learning came out in academia. Quantum physics and computing is growing in academia. So you see those emerging areas developing in academia, and I think this is how they complement each other. And we should also not forget that academia has another role, which is educating people. So education remains where you're supposed to educate, but maybe needs to advance with time.
Okay, great. There is a question in the live chat.
I got a question online.
Yeah, could you, great talk. Thank you for the wonderful talk. Could you please comment on how your STAM work is similar to multi-scale transformers in terms of time, memory, and complexity?
So I think what we've done in our STAM is very, very simple. As I said, we just select 16 frames and we pass each frame into a visual transformer and then a temporal transformer. It's very, very simple and it's end-to-end. So you can train it end-to-end, which is a great benefit. We don't do any averaging afterwards. We don't use any 3D convolutions, which are time-consuming. Our objective was something which is fast and simple, because if you imagine having millions of users uploading millions of videos and we are going to process all those videos, it's going to cost us so much money that it might not be worth it. So we came up with a very simple solution. This is what we're doing. And I think you can see how there are other methods that have other objectives. So.
Okay. Let's thanks Lee again.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. I thank you all for staying here, and I would like to encourage you and remind you that there are talks also tomorrow and the day after, and they're all going to be broadcasted via YouTube, so I highly recommend for you to go and watch them. But there's another opportunity for you to also do some interactions, to see posters from all over the world, and to socially interact with people from the larger community. And this will be done via a platform called Gather.Town. And so the details are in the website, and you can register and go and use it, but here is a short description of how it's going to work.
Hello everyone and welcome to the ICCP 2021 Gather.Town space. This is a virtual space that you can use to browse ICCP posters, ask questions to poster presenters, and interact and socialize with other conference attendees. The space consists of 5 large rooms. When you first join, you will be in the main area where we are right now. At the top side of this area, there are doorways to 4 rooms that contain the posters. There are signs all over the floor pointing towards these poster rooms. For navigation help, you can take a look at the map available by pressing X. The map shows you the space you are currently in and available doorways for moving from one area to another. You can leave the map by clicking the X sign available at the top right. To see who else is currently online, you can use the participant list available by clicking this icon at the bottom left. If you want to locate someone you see on the list, you can click on their name, select the locate function, and then follow the directions that appear on the floor. To talk to someone you see on the map, you can walk towards them, and your audio and video will activate automatically once you are close enough. Anyone else coming close to you will have their audio and video activated, and they will be able to join in your conversation. If you want to reduce background noise, you can create a bubble with a specific attendee by right-clicking on their avatar and selecting the bubble option. Alternatively, if you want to have a completely private conversation, you can use one of the private spaces available in the main area. We have built 3 types of private spaces marked with distinctly colored floors. At the right side of the main area, there are medium-sized spaces that can accommodate about 10 attendees. At the bottom side of the main area, there are small private spaces for conversations between 2, 3, or 4 attendees. And at the left side of the main area, there are large spaces for up to 40 attendees. Anytime you enter such a private space, only you and others in the same private space will be able to talk to each other, no matter who else is around. To browse posters, you can go to any of the 4 poster rooms and explore the posters contained there. We have arranged the posters in a 5x5 grid to make it easier to explore them. When you press X, in addition to the map, you will see a list of all posters along with their ID and room. You can use this list to see what posters are available and where they are located. You can also click on the title of a poster you are interested in to open a new tab that moves you directly to that poster. Once you have found a poster booth that you are interested in, you can interact with it in 2 different ways. First, you can move to the poster area to browse the poster or slide presentation, or you can move to the video area to watch the video presentation available for this poster. Note that not all poster booths contain both poster presentations and video presentations. To ask questions to the poster presenter, move to the private space marked as Presenter area. Poster presenters will be sharing their screen so they can point to their poster or other presentation materials. Lastly, here are a few account settings you may find helpful. If you are lost or stuck somewhere, click at the bottom of your screen and select the Reset Position option to move back to the main area. If you want to change your name, click again at the bottom of your screen, select Edit, and type in your updated name. If you want to reduce the interaction area around you, click at the bottom of your screen and turn on Quiet Mode. Lastly, if you need any help, please feel free to reach out to our volunteers. You can find volunteers in the participant list. They will be the users that have AA- prefixed to their name. You can contact them from anywhere in the Gather.Town space by using the chat function. Or you can reach out to them as with all other attendees.
Okay, so the first talk of this session, afternoon session, is a paper talk. And the speaker is Elias Nechme, who is here. This is one of the rare occasions, I think, that you get to meet someone that you have an article with for the first time on stage.
That's true.
Good luck.
הפעלתי את המצגת, אבל זה לא מופיע. כן, נראה. Okay, so hi everyone. Finally a physical conference, and therefore experimental tribute to this great meeting. This is an experimental measurement in a microscope, essentially with the conference name. So, but before we get into all of that, let me first introduce myself. So my name is Elias Nechme, and I'm from the Electrical Engineering Department at the Technion, jointly supervised by Professor Tomer Michaeli and Professor Yoav Shechtman. And today I'll be presenting our work titled Learning Optimal Wavefront Shaping for Multi-Channel Imaging. Okay, so first let us start with the motivation. So essentially in biology, several interesting applications require us to track the subcellular diffusion of subcellular elements. And now this information can tell us a lot about cellular function. Specifically, in sleep and cancer research, we're interested in tracking telomeres, which are the tips of chromosomes inside the nucleus of our cells. Now, naturally, biology is three-dimensional because this is the way things are built. However, in a standard microscope, we acquire a 2D image only. Now, usually to see these telomeres, we tag them with fluorescent proteins, and therefore a time-lapse image of such a tracking behavior would look something like this. Now, as you can see, only a few points will be in focus in a standard microscope, and the rest will be defocused simply because they're at a different depth than the camera focal plane. And this is a problem because these things are moving, so we can't simply just scan the focal position to get their 3D, to get the entire 3D volume. And therefore, the question is, how can we image and track in 3D, and so getting 3D tracks over time? So to answer this question, let us look more closely at a single point source moving out of focus in a standard microscope. Okay, so here you see essentially a point source moving in Z at the left, and here you see the PSF, or the image of this point source, being changed while this point source is moving. And as you can see, the image of this point source, or the PSF on the camera, is symmetric above and below focus, and therefore we have a depth ambiguity. We can't tell if it's above or below focus. And also what you can see is that we have a very narrow Z range, that after this Z range, the signal becomes very diffuse. And therefore, in typical SNRs, this will be drowned in noise. So the trick to remedy this is to manipulate the Fourier plane, which is here, by inserting an optical element called the phase mask, such that now, after inserting this phase mask into the system, the shape generated on the camera for a single point source is not symmetric above and below focus, and therefore we don't have depth ambiguity. And also, the signal is preserved very nicely across the entire Z range. Now, specifically, this example PSF is called the tetrapod PSF, and was shown to be optimal for estimating the position of a single emitter over large Z ranges. Okay, so now coming back to the 3D tracking application we had from earlier, applying this trick in the Fourier plane, we get time-lapse of images that look something like this. Now, you see that all of our out-of-focus emitters have a distinct shape telling their depth, and therefore we're truly acquiring with a single snapshot the entire 3D volume. However, if we look at nearby points, we see that their shapes overlap on the camera, and therefore this makes it difficult to precisely tell their 3D positions. So in our work from Nature Methods last year, we essentially learned the PSF end-to-end with the reconstruction network to try and overcome this challenge. And indeed, we were able to push the detection performance at high emitter densities from this tetrapod baseline significantly higher up. However, despite the great advancement, there are still lots of very important applications that live somewhere around here. And therefore, the question of this work, the premise of this work was, how can we get higher detection rates at high emitter densities? Okay, so the main proposition in this work is the following. Instead of capturing 100% of the signal in a single imaging channel, getting a fairly high SNR image in camera 1 here, what we do is we do the following. We give up on this SNR slightly and get only 50% of the signal into this imaging channel, and then tunnel the other 50% into a second imaging channel employing a different PSF. And therefore now we have two images, although in each channel we have strictly reduced SNR, but we have twice the sensor area. And therefore, if we design the PSFs cleverly, maybe we can increase the detection rate at high emitter densities. Before I tell you how we design the PSF of each channel, let me first tell you how, given a pair of images, we extract the 3D positions. And this is done by a convolutional neural network trained on simulations. Now, specifically, this architecture is not a standard one. We proposed it in our work from last year. But what you really need to know about it is that it takes the concatenated 2D images and output a 3D occupancy grid where occupied voxels are essentially emitters, stands for localized emitters. Now, to train this architecture, we use a loss function that is comprised of two terms. Okay, the first term it tries to measure accurate localization, and the second term tries to increase the detection rate. Okay, now that we know how to localize the images, the true question is, how do we acquire the two images in the first place such that we get high detection rates at high emitter densities? Now, to answer this question, we propose three different design methods. And first, let us start with the intuitive one. Okay, so in the first method, we design an extended depth of field PSF, or an EDOF PSF, that maintains a Gaussian-like spot across the entire Z range, regardless of the emitter depth. And we combine this PSF with the tetrapod PSF. So intuitively, we're splitting the localization problem into complementary channels, where the EDF PSF encodes XY and the tetrapod PSF encodes Z. And so now if we look back at the overlapping tetrapods in dense regions, and we're assisted with this additional measurement with the EDF PSF, then this measurement essentially can act as an oracle, giving away the XY positions of all the emitters in the overlapping region. And therefore, the network can use this additional information as prior knowledge to solve for Z in the overlapping regions in camera 2. So that was in a nutshell method 1. Moving on to method 2, we take an estimation theory point of view. Specifically, we minimize the Cramer-Rao lower bound for a single emitter position estimation. So here you see the phase mask being updated in the Fourier plane and the PSFs being updated in the image plane. And as you can see, this is the stable local minima of this optimization. Now, if we look at this result more closely by again scanning a point source in Z, we see that essentially the information is split axially between the two channels, where one channel encodes for positive defocus and the second channel encodes for negative defocus. And this is also evident in the Cramer-Rao lower bound plots, where one mask optimizes the lower part of the axial range, the second mask optimizes the upper part, and jointly, they both optimize the CRB efficiently over the entire Z range. Finally, for the cherry on top, we design the PSFs with the most successful method, which is the end-to-end learning. In this case, we simulate 3D positions of overlapping dense emitters and pass them through the numerical model of our microscope to generate the intensity patterns. Afterwards, this is split by a polarizing beam splitter such that it's fed into two encoders, which are essentially physical simulation layers, each parameterized by its own phase mask, calligraphic M1 and calligraphic M2, and the resulting encoded measurements are then concatenated and fed to a reconstruction network. Now, this network tries to recover our simulated ground truth positions, manifested here by these green triangles. And using our loss function, we compare the recovery of the network with the simulated ground truth and backpropagate the gradients, both to update the reconstruction network and further backpropagate through the physics to update the phase masks at the Fourier plane. And we repeat this essentially until convergence. So here you see, again, the phase mask being updated in the Fourier plane and the PSFs updated in the image plane. And as you can see, very quickly, the network decides to converge to complementary patterns, although our loss function is, or although our optimization is performed pixel-wise, and we don't have a loss function enforcing this behavior. Okay, and this persists throughout the entirety of the iterations, such that essentially the resulting phase masks in the Fourier plane are almost flipped versions of one another, resulting in complementary PSFs in image space. Now, if we look at this result again more closely by scanning a point source in the Z direction, we essentially see that this is the resulting PSFs. So we see a very interesting behavior here, such that the 3D position information is multiplexed into the two channels. And if we look at the composite of these two channels, we see that essentially the side lobe movement between the two channels are cooperating such that the depth is encoded in the relative movement. Okay, so now that I have bombarded you with 3 different methods to design the PSFs, the true question is, how do our results compare with the current state of the art? So to answer this, we measure detection and precision in realistic simulations. And specifically here you see again the current state of the art with the end-to-end optimized single channel PSF. And this is the result of our 3 methods, all improving in detection compared to the current state of the art. Specifically, for method 3, we get almost a 2-fold improvement at the highest tested emitter density, which is a great result. As for precision, and this is the current state of the art, and in here actually we measure precision by RMSE laterally and axially. And in this case you would like your RMSE to be lower, because this means more accurate. And this is the result for our 3 methods, and as you can see, method 2 and method 3 improve the results, where again method 3 is the leading approach. Now just to give you a hint what this density axis really means, let's take a visual example at a density of 0.5. So this is simulated with method 3 with the PSFs learned end-to-end. And if we feed these 2 images into the reconstruction network, we get a perfect reconstruction of all 90 emitters with a Jacquard of 100%. And the lateral and axial RMC are also very low, which means very precisely. Okay, so showing you lots of simulation is nice, but the true question is, does this work in real experiments? This is where the catch usually lies. Okay, so to answer this question, we performed a live cancer cell experiment where we track the telomeres of a cancer cell over time. Okay, so here you see the captured images in the microscope, and here you see the estimated nuclear envelope, the localized telomeres, and the tracking time bar. So if I play this movie, you can see that essentially the network is able to localize all of the visible telomeres very accurately, tracking all the different diffusion behaviors across the entirety of the nucleus. So to validate that, in fact, our 3D positions are not just made up 3D tracks, we came back to the experimental data and rendered our 3D positions recovered by the network using the imaging model. Okay, so here you see the two imaging channels, the experimental measurements. On the top right of each, you see the measured zoom in the white square. And below it, you see the recovered image by the network. And if I now scan this white square across the entire field of view, you see that the PSFs are very much matching in both channels, which means that we're, in fact, precisely recovering all positions. Okay, so after such a long slide, let us just conclude. So to summarize, in this work, we proposed a dual view scheme that splits the intensity 50-50 between two cameras in order to increase the emitter detection at high densities. And specifically to design the PSFs of both cameras, we proposed 3 different design methods, where the leading method was the end-to-end learning of both PSFs. And now coming back to the original premise of increasing the detection rates at high emitter densities, with this work, we were able to push this significantly higher up. And therefore, if you're a biologist interested in such things, there are exciting new opportunities for you using our method. And with that, I would conclude and thank all my collaborators and, of course, the funding agencies who made this work possible, also Daniel Freeman from Google. And if you're interested in more details, please refer to the paper. Also, code and sample data will be shown on my GitHub, so stay tuned for that. And finally, I will thank you all in an experimental fashion yet again. And with that, if time permits, I would like to take any questions. Thank you.
Questions?
Hi.
Hi.
It's working? Yeah. Would there be any gain from splitting it to further channels, like 3-4 times further?
Yes, we didn't try it, but my gut feeling is that it wouldn't, because it would come at the cost of precision. Because after a certain point, you're splitting your photons into more and more channels, and therefore, it's likely that it will not benefit you in terms of precision, but maybe in terms of detection. But we didn't try it. So our code will be online. You're more than welcome to simulate it and see it for yourself.
Any more questions? Okay, so let's thank Dennis again.
Thank you.
Mark? So the next talk is optics, physics optics abstract talk by Tal Zomer from Ori Katz's group, and he will tell us about pixel reassignment in ultrasound imaging.
Okay, hello. My name is Tal, and I'm from Ori Katz's lab in the Hebrew University. And I'm going to talk to you about how we utilized a super resolution method from fluorescence microscopy and implemented it in ultrasound imaging. Now, we won't dive into ultrasound yet. Just say that conventional ultrasound is, in fact, a method of confocal imaging. And in confocal microscopy, we focus illumination in the sample plane into a spot, and also the detection is focused into the same spot. And using that, we scan the sample plane and form an image. And also in ultrasound, the transmission is focused into a spot in the medium, and the emerging echoes from that spot are detected. And you scan the medium and form an image. Now, if we look at a 1D example, there is no such a thing as focus into a spot, as we just saw with the PSF. when you're trying to focus into a spot, we actually get a smear. That's the point spread function of illumination, whose extent is about a wavelength over the numerical aperture. And when we're trying to focus our detection onto a spot on the sample plane, we get a smear in the detector plane, and that's the PSF of detection. And the effective PSF of confocal imaging is the product of illumination and detection PSFs. Now, for that case of illumination, if we were able to detect the entire illumination intensity distribution in the detector plane, that would be it. The intensity in X out for the focus on the first X in. And as we scan the sample plane, assuming the PSFs are shift invariant, so this will be the intensity distribution over the detector plane. And now that is the signal matrix, the detected signal at X out for focused illumination at X in. Now, in confocal imaging with a very small pinhole, it's actually measuring the diagonal elements of this matrix. Now, this will yield an image of good resolution, but with low signal. Increasing the pinhole is similar to measuring a summation over a few off diagonals at each column. And the extent of summation is proportional to the pinhole diameter. Now, that will enable the collection of more signal, but at the cost of resolution. And that's the signal resolution trade-off in confocal microscopy. That increasing the pinhole diameter will increase the detection efficiency, but the full width at half maximum of the effective PSF will get wider. And now, to answer this trade-off, in 2010, a method called Pixel-Reassignment was experimentally performed. And it said two things. First, use an array instead of a single detector, and that allows to obtain the entire signal matrix. And as you have the signal matrix, sum over n off-diagonal elements, when n is our filter size, and we're using a filter because elements that are far from the diagonal will have less signal and probably will contribute less to the improvement. We will observe later the effect of filter size over the improvement. And this anti-diagonal summation is actually reassigning every detected signal to the midpoint between illumination and detection points, and hence pixel reassignment. The effective PSF of pixel reassignment is a bit different, is a convolution of between illumination and detection PSFs, rescaled by a factor of half. Now, the advantages of this method in confocal microscopy were that in fact increasing the pinhole size will increase the SNR even more than it will increase in the confocal case, and still cause an improvement in resolution instead of widening the full width at half maximum of the effective PSF. And the only cost of this was the use of an array instead of a single detector. Now, implementing this in ultrasound imaging is evident, and that's because in ultrasound the probe is actually an array of elements, and these elements record the acoustic field. So using that data, we can offline calculate the reflected signal matrix, and as we have it, we can again, the diagonal elements are the confocal image, but now pixel reassignment processing can be done. So first, data acquisition, as I said, is identical to confocal scan in ultrasound, and that data is used to calculate the reflection matrix, and then an image is formed by summing over n anti-diagonal elements. And so we first experimented a little bit with point reflectors at a tissue mimicking phantom. And you can see that there appear to be a resolution improvement on the bottom right two reflectors that are now resolved. But we wanted to observe the change in PSF. And to remind you, the Pixel-Reassignment PSF is the rescaled convolution of illumination and detection PSFs. And the confocal PSF is the product of the illumination and detection PSFs. Now, assuming that the PSFs are diffraction limited sinc functions, so if we're observing these two bottom point reflectors, the confocal PSF, that's the red one here, theoretically, will be a sinc squared, and the Pixel-Reassignment PSF will be a rescaled convolution of two sinc functions. And you can see that it is indeed thinner, but with stronger side lobes, and that's an artifact of the convolution. Now, experimentally, if we can observe the cross section of these two point reflectors, which is effectively the PSF, and you can see indeed a thinner PSF with stronger side lobes. Now, we mentioned that only n elements are summed over the anti-diagonal, and that's because elements that are far from the diagonal have less signal, and therefore will contribute less to the pixel reassignment process. So we wanted to see how filter size changed the improvements. So if we look at the lateral resolution as a function of filter size, we're measuring filter size in units of the effective PSF main lobe width. So you can see that the main improvement in lateral resolution, up to about 20-25%, is in the first two main lobe widths, and that's where most of the signal is. And also the improvement in SNR, you can see that is building up until two main lobe widths. And after that, as more noise is summed in, the improvement is degrading. Now, we said that the extent of PSF is inversely proportional to the numerical aperture, and that means that in each depth there will be a different spot size, as you can see here. And at the left is the confocal scan, and at the right is the pixel reassignment scan. You can see that the spot sizes are getting wider as they go deeper. Now we want to see that our improvement is actually on all depths, and indeed we can see that on the entire range that we have observed, there is improvement in the full width at half maximum of the PSF. To sum things up, that was pretty quick actually. We were using data acquired identically to conventional ultrasound and managed to get an improvement in resolution while also improving SNR. The price was mainly computational and the strong side lobes. Our current efforts are to do this more computationally efficient and maybe scan more complex targets. And if anyone has any more ideas for how to use the reflection metrics for other things, we would be delighted to hear from you. So thank you for your attention, and that's all.
Hi. Okay, hi.
Okay, hi.
First of all, thank you very much for this very nice talk. I have a question. So my impression, I wasn't aware of this algorithm. So this is just an algorithm of post-processing where you take two measurements and you sum it up. So it is not formulated as an optimization problem where there's some kind of an optimal superposition.
No.
So is it possible to conceive a better method, which is not just let's do something ad hoc, but let's say this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this optimal result.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm looking for some optimal result. That's my goal. I'm looking for maybe a superposition of measurements. and let's optimize the weights, for example. So is it possible to get further in this direction?
I think this is a different direction than this one, because Pixel-Reassignment is purely physical. Because the person, Shepard, who suggested it, said that when you illuminate a spot and detect another spot, the effective PSFs of this detection is in the midpoint. So you need to reassign the detected signal to the midpoint. So optimization can be done after that, but this is not connected to pixel reassignment, actually.
No, actually, I think that can lead to pixel reassignment, which is more evolved than just two numbers, maybe more than that. But we can talk about it later.
Okay. Gladly.
More questions? Okay, so we're a little bit short of time, so let's thank The next talk will be given remotely. This is a paper talk by Mark Scheinin. Are we? And okay, great. And the title of the talk is Deconvolving Diffraction for Fast Imaging of Sparse Scenes.
Hi, I'm Mark Scheinin from Carnegie Mellon University, and I'll be presenting our paper titled Deconvolving Diffraction for Fast Imaging of Sparse Scenes. In this work, we focus on a class of computer vision applications where the goal is to capture high-speed videos of sparse scenes. By sparse scenes, I'm talking about applications where the scene points of interest occupy the image plane very sparsely. In these applications, capturing the full 2D sensor for every frame is wasteful and limits the maximum achievable frame rate. This is because the maximum frame rate of our camera is limited by the bandwidth that is required to read out, digitize, transfer, and store the large volume of pixel data. So what can we do about these scenes? Well, most cameras allow a higher frame rate by only reading out pixels from a predefined region of interest. But this doesn't really help us here because points outside the ROI would be missed. Event cameras, which are cameras designed to measure changes of intensities, are fast enough, but they typically have low spatial resolutions and low field factors because of the additional electronics needed per pixel. A different approach is to capture a small portion of the full image at high frame rates, but compensating for the point's locality by optically spreading the incident light for every scene point such that it hits a large part of the sensor plane. Then, the full resolution image is decoded from these sparse measurements. Several key prior works use this approach for high-speed imaging. Antipa et al. Place a diffuser in front of a bare sensor and sample the resulting acoustic pattern using the rows of a rolling shutter sensor. But their method is unable to encode the entire scene all at once due to a time-varying field of view created by the aperture. And so their method can miss the fast motion of points outside the time-varying field of view. Weinberg and Katz had the insight that placing the diffuser at the pupil plane will create a speckle PSF on the image plane, which can then be sampled by the rolling shutter sensor. However, because of the speckle-based PSF, their method was designed for scenes composed of narrowband sources, and therefore cannot be readily applied to our applications. And finally, last year we presented a method called diffraction line imaging, where we use an off-the-shelf diffraction grating to spread the light of broadband sources into color-coded diffraction rainbow streaks. While our method does not have the limitations mentioned above, it too will fail for these scenes because the density in these scenes violates the method's assumption that no two points overlay horizontally. In this work, we extend our prior method to a new class of significantly denser scenes. So why does diffraction line imaging fail in these denser scenes? Firstly, unlike other methods, point positioning in diffraction line imaging relies not only on the PSF shape, but also on the PSF color. The method assumes that the color measured at each vertical position belongs to a single scene point and can therefore be mapped directly to that point's horizontal position. But in denser scenes, most of the time we measure some mixture of the rainbow colors. Moreover, the more mixture we have, the more we are prone to signal saturation. And this is why applying diffraction line imaging to these scenes will fail. So how do we solve this problem? Well, since this is a harder problem to solve, let's allow ourselves to gather more signal from our sensor. Now, in just a few slides, I'll talk about how to do this in practice. But for now, let's suppose that we can choose which camera pixels to read out using a binary sampling matrix W sigma, where sigma denotes the camera color channel. The sampling matrix can have an arbitrary configuration, and it can even be random, but it must be sparse to maintain the low bandwidth and support a high frame rate. A second degree of freedom of our new method is that it supports arbitrary diffraction point spread functions denoted by HDiff. So for example, instead of the single axis grating that creates a rainbow streak, we can now use a double axis grating whose point spread function looks like a star. Okay, so let's combine everything and define the image formation model of our imaging system. Given the scene I, the image on our sensor plane is approximately a convolution of I with the diffraction point spread function. Then, the image plane is sampled using our sampling matrix to yield our sparse image measurements. By the way, this type of vertical sampling is in fact possible with many machine vision cameras. It's done by defining multiple ROIs, and then the camera image is the concatenation of these ROIs. So now that we have a forward model, we can use it to solve an inverse problem. So, we seek an image that when convolved with our pre-SF and sampled with our sampling matrix, best approximate our measurements, while also being relatively sparse. This is a commonly used convex optimization problem, which can be solved using readily available software packages. So far, we assume that there is a single known PSF that describes the scene. But general scenes can have a variety of sources, each emitting or reflecting a different spectrum, like this scene, which has 4 LEDs with different colors. In this experiment, we used a double-axis diffraction grating, and so the point spread function of each LED is a star, having a slightly different spectrum. In such cases, we model the reflectance spectrum of each scene point as a linear combination of K reflectance spectra. Then, we extend the image formation model and the inverse problem for a dictionary of K point spread functions, and recover the sparse scene contributions per source spectrum K. Notice that in this scene, we not only recover the LED positions, but also get the LED color. So before we get to the results, I'm going to mention another piece of the puzzle which I will not have time to present here. Some of you might be asking the question, given a sensor sampling and the point spread function, am I guaranteed to recover a point everywhere in the field of view? And if not, then where? Or to rephrase this as a system design question, given a certain PSF, how should we determine the sensor sampling, since the sampling determines both the recoverable domain and the maximum frame rate? Well, these are hard questions to answer for the general case, but in the paper, we do answer both for the special case of a single-axis diffraction grating sampled with vertical ROIs. Let's see some experimental results. And let's start by looking at some motion capture experiments. In these experiments, we use both the traditional spherical point markers as well as curve markers, namely markers that create curves on the image plane. These curves cause many signal overlays, which break the no overlay assumption of our prior work. In this experiment, we fitted a toy gun and its darts with retroreflective markers. The gun can fire at a fast rate of 5 darts per second. Our camera is configured to output only the yellow arrow eyes, and thus we are able to capture a video of the firing gun at 1000 frames per second using a 120 FPS camera. Here we see the recovered markers video sped up to mimic a video at 30 frames per second. And here is the recovered video at 1000 FPS, clearly capturing the trajectories of the individual darts in flight. In this motion capture scene, the actor is performing a fast rope skipping exercise in which the rope makes 2 passes under the actor's feet per jump instead of just 1. Both actor and rope are fitted with retroreflective markers. Here's the video captured using our system at 1000 FPS. Here is the recovered video sped up to 30 FPS, and here is 1000 FPS. Notice the first revolution of the rope under the feet, and here comes the second revolution just now. In this experiment, the actor is wearing a Tron-like suit that outlines his skeleton. Here's the recovered 1000 FPS video of the markers. Notice again that the actor is swinging the rope 2 times under his feet for every jump. This is a fast exercise that doesn't always go well. In this experiment, we use our system for particle image velocimetry, whose goal is to reconstruct the water flow in the tank. Here's a video of the white tracer particles in the water tank captured with our system at 1000 FPS. And here's the recovered video of the 2D projection of the particles' 3D flow at 1000 FPS. Here's another video where the sensor subsampling is higher, which enables a higher frame rate of 2000 FPS. And here is the recovered video at 2000 FPS. Lastly, we show an example where we recover a high-speed video of combustible particles generated from a sparkler. Here, we see the view from our camera showing the generated sparks on the left and the corresponding diffraction streaks which we sample with 8 camera ROIs on the right. And here is the recovered sparkler video at 1000 FPS. Observe how some of the sparks collide with the floor on the bottom left and then further disperse upon impact. Please check out our project page for more details and additional results, and thank you for listening.
Mark, do you hear?
Can you hear me?
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Sorry. Can you hear me now?
אתה במיוט? Mark, are you accidentally in mute?
Can you hear? No.
Still can't hear you.
I am not muted.
But it was a fantastic talk. We can see the microphone, we can lip read what you're saying, but we can't hear you. Yeah, we're going to try once again.
I will leave this.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but we won't be able to... show me. Mark? Okay, so I'm very sorry, but we will have to continue. Our next talk is Physics Optics Abstract Talk by Roy Ronen from the Technion. And it will be about a Plankton reconstruction through population-based statistical optical tomography.
Okay. So our work is a continuation of the pioneering work of Aviad Levis et al., which have generously allowed us to present to you some of their own slides. Plankton are important for a variety of reasons, mainly environmental. Although these organisms are very small, they appear in huge population. Thus, they play a critical role in producing oxygen and absorbing CO2. Also, they are the first link in the oceanic food chain. The plankton 3D structure has a major impact on its interaction with the environment. Recent advances in 3D imaging focus on lab systems. However, some plankton population specifications are difficult to assess in the lab. Therefore, plankton are measured in situ, outdoors. Using plankton images, we aim to reconstruct the plankton's volumetric structure and its population size distribution. This can be done using tomography. Classic tomography is performed around a single fixed object. The 3D volumetric density of the object is recovered using multiple projections at known orientations. However, the problem of population tomography is more challenging. Consider an underwater imaging system. As plankton drifts through its field of view one at a time, a stream of images is acquired. Each image is an orthographic projection of a different object. The data is an ensemble of random views of random different objects within a population. Each image object is sampled from an unknown population size distribution and projected at an unknown random orientation. The stream of images serves as input to our algorithm. First, we estimate for each image object its scale and orientation. Then, the images, scales, and orientation are used for recovering the 3D volumetric density of the plankton. Before we get to how we do it, let's see some results.
We use our method on images that were acquired by our in situ underwater system. The Scripps Plankton camera, designed at Scripps Institute, is an in situ dark field microscope developed to continuously monitor plankton populations. The resolution is approximately 7.4 microns, while each image plankton is about 1 millimeter in size. Here, we don't have the ground truth object. Thus, we use cross-validation for quality assessment. Orientation and scale are estimated using the entire image ensemble. Then, a single image is excluded from the ensemble and the 3D object is recovered without it. The estimated 3D object is reprojected using the left-out recovered scale and orientation and compared to the excluded image. On the left, we show a few captured images from our in situ imaging system and their corresponding reprojections. On the right, we present the recovered 3D object and the estimated population size distribution. Here we present another example. On the left, we show a few captured plankton images from our in situ imaging system and their corresponding reprojection. On the right, we present the recovered 3D object and the estimated population size distribution. Now, I will describe our approach for resolving the population tomography problem. Consider a pair of 3D objects with an unknown 3D relative rotations between them, denoted as R I to J and R J to I. Note that we don't have the 3D rotated object, but a single projection of each one of them. Equivalently, there are unknown 3D scales between the objects, denoted as M I to J and M J to I. Given these transformations from I to J and the projection operator, we can project object I for obtaining a similar image to the image of object J. Similarly, given the transformation from J to I, we can link between image J and image I. Let's assume for a moment that we have a noisy estimation of this 3D rotation and scale between any object in each image pair. We solve optimization problems to recover the global rotations and scales. So, what is the problem here? The rotation and scale estimation are prone to errors due to non-rigid deformation of the objects. A previous method addressed this by considering any deformed object as an outlier. This reduces the population statistics. Instead, our method uses a statistical error model to overcome non-rigid deformations. The model was originally developed for a noisy images of rigid objects that were imaged by cryo-electron microscopy. We adapt it for plankton recovery, where in our case, the non-rigid deformation of the object acts as noise. To overcome errors caused by non-rigid deformations, we construct confident weights for a more robust rotation estimation. The weights rely on triplets of images instead of pairs. The ij weight represents the probability that the 3D relative rotation R I to J was estimated well. Two open issues remain: how we estimate the 3D relative rotation and scales, and how we construct the confident weights based on triplets of images. Let's begin with the first. Given only a pair of images of the objects I and J, our goal is to estimate the 3D relative rotation and scale between these objects. Established self-calibration method assume that the object is opaque. Here, the objects are translucent. Thus, we don't use standard computer vision-based self-calibration. So, how can we find the 3D relative rotation and scale here? This can be done using the Fourier central slide theorem. Consider a rotated 3D object and its projection acquired by imaging. This theorem states that the 2D Fourier transform of the image is equivalent to a central slice in the 3D Fourier space of the 3D object. This means that a pair of Fourier images are two central slices in the 3D Fourier space. Therefore, intersect at a common line. For finding the common lines and the relative scale, every line pair between the images is correlated using varying scales. The angle of this line pair gives us a constraint on the relative 3D rotation between the two objects. This process is repeated for all image pairs, obtaining for all pairs the relative 3D rotations and scales. Now, I will describe our method for constructing the triplets-based confident weights to overcome non-rigid deformation of the objects. Consider the angular error between the true and estimated common lines, marked here in green. We use the error statistic for a more robust rotation estimation. We model the angular error PDF, as a composition of two PDFs. With probability P, the error is drawn from a normal distribution with zero mean and standard deviation sigma. Here the error is small, therefore the relative 3D rotation was estimated well. While with probability 1 minus P, the error is drawn from a uniform distribution, means the relative 3D rotation was estimated badly. Ideally, P is 1 and sigma is 0. However, our model parameters P and sigma are unknown. Thus, we follow a method from the cryo-electron microscopy field to estimate them using triplets of images. Consider the triplets of images I, J, and K. We estimate the relative rotation between these images pairwise using the Fourier central slice theorem we discussed earlier. A perfect estimation of these three relative rotations should satisfy this algebraic condition. However, as we said, these rotation estimations are prone to errors due to non-rigid deformation of the objects. Therefore, we use a numerical scalar score function between 0 and 1 to evaluate how much this condition is satisfied. Aggregating all triplet scores, we can estimate the model parameters P and sigma. Details are in our paper. Recall that if the angular error of the object I and J is drawn from the normal distribution, the relative rotation was estimated well. Therefore, the probability that the I-J relative rotation is good depends on the estimated sigma and all triplet scores that contain the images I and J. This probability is determined numerically from simulations. Similarly, the probability that the I-J relative rotation was estimated badly depends on all triplet scores that contain the images I and J. Using these probabilities, F good and F bad, and the Bayes theorem, we construct confident weights for 3D rotation estimation. Obtaining more robust and accurate rotation estimations leads to a better recoveries of the object scales and 3D volumetric structure. More details also in our paper. To conclude, we achieve 3D tomography using a random ensemble of images. We recover an average volumetric density of the plankton and its population size distribution. Here, we demonstrate our method on another plankton example from a public dataset. To counter errors due to non-rigid deformations, we weight the data by advanced model developed for cryo-electron microscopy. On simulation, we assess that our method improves the relative 3D density error by 31% in comparison to the previous method by Levis et al. Also, we demonstrate the approach on live plankton we image using our underwater system. Thank you.
Very interesting work, very nice talk, thank you. I have two quick questions. One, when you're comparing this central slice in the Fourier, do you compare the complex values when you do the correlation, or you just look at the...
Yes, the complex value.
And I had another question, just technical one. There was a strobing light, so why use strobing and not just
short exposure and like a video exposure?
I don't really know. I didn't design the system.
The experimental one. Okay.
So yeah, so maybe you can talk with the other guys that designed it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so I understand that we can talk to Mark after all. Excellent. Okay.
Okay. Hi, Mark. Shalom. Can you hear us? Mark, can you hear us? Yes. Yay.
I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
So do we have question for Mark? Yes.
Hi, Mark. Can you hear me?
There's a huge lag, by the way.
Okay.
Hi. So my question is this. So you have to choose your point speed function and your imaging pattern. Is it done per experiment, per camera?
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Multiple functions was constrained by the type of diffraction gradients that we have in the lab. So we had a bunch of them, and each one of them created a different, ignoring the lag. And in terms of the sense of sampling, again, we will by the type of sense of sampling that our cameras are enabling. And
Okay.
Yeah.
You guys entire plane, like the star function, and when the light levels were low, we will want to use the so basic shadings that created rainbow streaks because they are more power efficient.
Okay, thank you. More questions?
I have one actually. Did you came up with the idea of this work only to do the gun experiment at the end?
No, if anything, it was to do the warp skipping experiment, which was kind of an athletic feat for me. but we thought about various scenarios where things heighten the gun and the whole work cases, such cases.
Okay, let's thank Mark again.
Okay, the next talk is a paper talk about adaptive gradient balancing for undersampling MRI reconstruction by Itzik Malkieli.
Okay. Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Itzik Malkiel. In this talk, I will briefly present a training technique named adaptive gradient balancing, or AGB in short, along with its applications in image-to-image translation and MRI reconstruction. AGB automates the process of combining adversarial loss terms and pixel-wise losses and streamlines hyperparameter search. Okay, so combining multiple loss terms is a convoluted process. This process becomes even more complex when one of the terms is an adversarial loss or a discriminator loss. Different from standard loss function, a discriminator loss is a learned function that dynamically changes during training. In the pix-to-pix scheme from Isola et al., a dual loss term objective is employed, incorporating a pixel-wise loss and a GAN loss. The prescribed weights proposed by the authors suggest a 100-to-1 ratio between the loss terms. This weighting was manually crafted by the authors after conducting a hyperparameter search. Applying pix-to-pix with its prescribed weights produces fairly good performance. In the example below, we can see an aerial photograph that was generated by an input map image. However, when training with a suboptimal combination, such as equal weights between the losses, the model yields poor results. This can be attributed to the domination of the discriminator loss over the pixel-wise loss, which in these settings is scaled by 100. In other scenarios, the optimal combinations of loss terms may change during training. For example, a too long pix-to-pix training applied with the prescribed weights can yield degraded performance. Here, we can see that a 1,000 epochs training on the left yields relatively poor performance compared to a 200 epochs training. This degradation in performance can be attributed to the domination of the GAN loss over the pixel-wise loss. By calculating the magnitude of the gradients on the last layer of the generator, we observe that the GAN gradients increase by 2 orders of magnitude during this long training. Our proposed adaptive gradient balancing mitigates this problem. In AGB, we track the contribution of the loss terms by calculating a running average on the gradient's magnitude of each loss. Then we upper bound the GAN loss by a factor of the gradient's magnitude of the pixel-wise loss. To this end, we utilize an adaptive beta variable that carefully decays the GAN loss gradients to roughly the same order of magnitude of those of the pixel-wise loss. The proposed AGB training on the right is able to recover from suboptimal loss combination, while a regular training generates images with artifacts. I would like to switch now to a different application of accelerating MRI reconstructions that was recently revolutionized by deep neural networks. In MRI scanning, data acquisition is inherently slow and sometimes requires 30 minutes for a full brain scale scan. Recent work suggests to accelerate the MRI scan time by undersampling the case-space data. However, a standard reconstruction of an undersampled case space yields images with aliasing artifacts. Deep neural networks have been harnessed to solve this task. The networks are trained with supervision to generate estimated fully sampled images from the given undersampled case space data. Training such a network to solely optimize a pixel-wise loss yields images with blurring artifacts. To mitigate the blurring and to improve image quality, we propose a conditional GAN model that optimizes a dual loss term objective composed of a W GAN loss and a pixel-wise loss. In a standard training, we observe that the GAN gradients appear to oscillate and increase, and this may be due to the discriminator network, which dynamically changes during training. In our experiment, we observed that image artifacts were introduced when the GAN gradient started to increase. The AGB training can overcome this or mitigate those image artifacts. In AGB, we carefully decay the GAN loss during training to ensure that it is bounded by a factor of the pixel-wise loss. As can be seen, instead of increasing or oscillating, the GAN gradients are now bounded to the pixel-wise gradients. By calculating a normalized MSE and Fresnel inception distance on a validation set per epoch, we observe that AGB yields an improved convergence. We also observe that AGB applied to our model produces better image quality and superior results compared to other alternatives. To assess model performance, we further report a mean opinion score test conducted by 4 MRI scientists on a holdout test set. Our generator architecture utilizes a densely connected iterative network. This is an unrolled iterative architecture composed of blocks of convolutions and data consistency layers. In this work, we also employ multiple skip connections between the blocks, which were shown to improve performance. Interestingly, each data consistency layer in this architecture is employed within or as a non-parametric operation inside each block in the model. A data consistency layer shades the input image with the coil sensitivity maps, transforms the resulted images to K-space, and imposes the sampling mask. Then it calculates the relative difference with the acquired K-space and returns the results to the image domain. This retrieved image or difference image ensures that the model generates images that are consistent with the corresponding undersampled K-space. In our study, we also employ or utilize the Fresnel inception distance, or FID in short, as an additional metric to assess model performance. We use FID metric to calculate the Fresnel distance between the embeddings of the two sets of generated images and fully sampled images. Okay. Thank you very much. I will be happy to take some questions.
So thank you. It's a very interesting talk. You're essentially creating an artificial image when you're making a reconstruction with a GAN. Or isn't there a chance or a risk of creating, and wait a second, you're doing it for an MRI purpose. Isn't there a risk or a chance of creating false positives? For instance, if you're looking for a tumor or something like that, or missing one, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, so basically, there are two things that we leverage in this technique or in this specific generator model. The first is the data consistency. This layer basically ensures that the retrieved image matches the undersampled K-space that is basically a prior for this reconstruction. So this is one thing. Another thing is that we utilize a pixel-wise loss, which basically makes sure that the reconstruction is accurate because we train it with supervision compared to the ground truth data. And there is one additional thing that is quite unique in our architecture is that we leverage a conditional discriminator that basically it can look at both the zero field images and the generated or real image and discriminate or distinguish between real pairs and fake pairs. This additional capability or additional input for the discriminators allows it to better match between features in the undersampled image and the generated image, and then improves the generator. Basically, those are three different techniques that may tackle this subject. But in practice, we also assessed it by testing with MRI scientists that looked visually, made some human visual test to assess that everything is there. And but it's a good question. The real thing is about we probably need to look at the most tiny features or in special domain. Those are probably the most challenging one to recover. The big tumors or tumors in general are quite big, and we did some tests and we took some data set of pathologies, and we saw that it is able to recover accurately also this type of pathologies. But this is a great question. I think the most challenging thing is to try to localize or not localize or to recover very, very tiny details in the image that might be lost due to this undersampling in K-space. And so basically a trade-off here. If you downsample too much, you may lose signal, and then you won't be able to recover it. If you sample too much, it will be too slow. So you're looking to a trade-off between those two.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And last but not least, we have physics optics abstract talk from Evgeny, 3D optoacoustic tomography via coded acoustic apertures.
Okay, Yofi. Last talk. I hope I still have your attention. So we will talk about optoacoustic imaging, which is a bit different from the work you have seen previously. And we will talk about our method of using coded acoustic apertures to perform optoacoustic imaging. And I must start with an introduction of what is optoacoustic imaging. So in optoacoustic imaging, laser pulses illuminate the object. The object goes through a thermal expansion and generate acoustic signals that propagate and get detected by a set of acoustic detectors. Now, from this set of acoustic signals, we perform computational reconstruction by a back projection algorithm and recover a three-dimensional optoacoustic absorption inside the imaged volume. And This is how it looks like eventually. So the greatest advantage of this imaging method is that you can see optical contrast with high resolution and a high depth of up to a few centimeters. And here you can see on the right side the human palm and the blood vessels mapped inside it, and the full map of a mouse body, three-dimensional map, obviously. Now, while it's nice, but to achieve high fidelity imaging, you really need to achieve wide view field for the high resolution. Okay, and this is in theory possible by using wide view field detectors, acoustic detectors, or alternatively by surrounding, like you see in this picture, the system with a lot of detectors that all are acquiring signals, so you have a full tomographic view. And while this is very nice in theory, in practice it's just impossible. Acoustic detectors have a low view field of approximately plus minus 20 degrees. And surrounding your object in such a complex setup, wiring all those signals and sampling all those signals simultaneously, maybe it's possible, but technically it's really impractical. Okay, and what happens in practice, as you can see in this slide, that detection is usually performed by an array which is scanned around the object. So those are very common examples. You can see here an array, a two-dimensional array, curved array, scanned around the object, which is a mouse, I think. And this is a custom-made spherical array scanned along the spiral trajectory around the mouse, and this is actually the setup used for this three-dimensional mapping of the mouse. So usually people are using piezoelectric elements that are really sensitive, but again, because they are limited in their view field, they require complex structures to achieve wide tomographic view. And additionally, they require some complex scanning to achieve this imaging, which makes the system even more complex. And this is exactly what we wanted to address in this work. We wanted to create a simple setup that will allow you to perform optoacoustic imaging using a flat system geometry, which is much more simple, and using piezoelectric detectors that offer high sensitivity. And you need to trust me on that. There's a lot of literature on that. Eventually, we wanted to make a system that uses off-the-shelf components. You can just go and buy in a store, in a relevant place, and perform using those components optoacoustic imaging. And we did it by developing a novel spatially coding approach with coded apertures. So I will first start with our preliminary work of using a single aperture. So we have a large aperture ultrasonic detector and a mask, acoustically blocking mask with a single aperture. The acoustic wave that propagates to the mask is mostly blocked by the mask, and only a small portion of a signal passes through the aperture. So it achieves semi-isotropic radiation pattern, as you can see in those two drawings. Effectively, we transform a single large aperture detector into a detector with the size and the shape of the aperture. Okay? We have characterized this mask detector. So we have measured the reference transmitter and using a 2D scan of this mask detector and recorded the diffraction pattern of this transmitter. And we have also measured the angular sensitivity of this detector with and without the mask and compare it. And as you can see here in the angular sensitivity measurement, we have extended the view field of this detector from plus minus 7 degrees to plus minus 50 degrees by adding the mask. So we have a huge view field. So again, good imaging results, good angular sensitivity, but the problem is the low SNR, because we block most of the signal. Okay, most of the signal is blocked by the mask, and only a small portion of the signal is passing through the aperture. Okay, so to solve that, we can, instead of a single aperture, use a combination of several apertures simultaneously, and then extract mathematically from those sets the signal per aperture. And I believe you have heard about it. It's called multiplexing. And this concept of multiplexing, there are several configurations that can be used. And an optimal configuration would enable you to achieve an SNR gain of square n divided by 2 when n is the number of used pixels in optics. In our case, it's the apertures or the detectors, whatever you like to call it. Okay? And the problem is is in ultrasound, you don't have a way to perform such modulation, and well, eventually have a detector placed inside a water tank. So if you want to change mask, to change the patterns, you need to manually change the mask inside the water tank. It's really impractical. And the way we address that is by developing cyclic codes that are both optimal in terms of SNR, meaning that they provide the previously shown multiplexing advantage, and additionally, they enable rapid pattern changing because they enable a change of a base function by minimal shift of the mask. And I will show it to you using a simple example, which if you lost me till now, you can really catch up now. We have a water tank and a single detector, and a mask that is masking the detector. And on the right side, you see the relevant coding matrix and the currently projected base vector. So what happens is that the mask is scanned through the measurement, and during the scan, the base vectors are changed. So we acquire 7 signals in this case, and from this acquisition, we mathematically extract the original signals, effectively converting a single detector into a 2-dimensional array with 7 elements. Now, similar concept can be applied to 2-dimensional scan because our cyclic patterns can also be configured to that. So we can use the scanning in 2-dimensional implementation, and this is more useful for higher order codes, and this is exactly what we did to demonstrate the concept with optoacoustic imaging. And this is our imaging system. So we have a pulse laser that generates acoustic signal. Pulse lasers generate laser signals. They illuminate the object. The object generates acoustic signals. Acoustic signals propagate to the mask. And then multiplexed combination of the acoustic signals propagate and are detected by the single detector. Now, the mask is scanned in a 2D formation, constantly changing the projected base function. And all the base functions are measured, and eventually we get a set of full multiplex measurements. And here you can see our single detector that is flat and have a large aperture of 30 millimeters, which basically means that its view field is really narrow. And we have masked this single detector with a mask with 1,700 elements. It's more elements. We converted this single detector into an array with 1,700 elements in an arrangement of 41 by 43. And this means an SNR gain of 21 in comparison to using a single aperture. Again, you can imagine that more area of the detector is used, so the SNR is much better. Okay, and you can see here the geometry of the mask with an aperture of 500 micrometers. And okay, and now we get to the results. So we have measured a suture from a copper wire coated in black Indian ink, and the diameter of the suture was 200 micrometers. So again, we have measured a total of 1,700 signals, but I will not show you all the signals. I will only show you a subset of signals on this yellow line, just for simplicity. So those are the multiplex signals. Each line here represents the ultrasonic signal as a function of time. And again, it's 43 positions over this yellow line. And it's just a scrambled set of signals. You don't see any clear, understandable information here. Only after you perform demultiplexing by multiplication with the inverse matrix, you see clear, understandable sinograms that make sense to people who do optoacoustics. Okay, so we have the demultiplex signals, and from those signals, we perform back projection using, again, computational algorithm, and we have performed the back projection and received 3-dimensional reconstruction of the suture. So this is a 3-dimensional reconstruction created from the acoustic signals. Okay. We have performed the same measurement for a mouse leg in vivo. So I will also show you only a subset of the yellow signals. And as previously, you see the multiplex signals that are not clear. And we perform demultiplexing, and you see the sinograms here. And the back projection recreates the optical contrast of the leg. And okay, I think I can summarize that we developed a spatially coding method to transform a single detector to a multi-element detection array. And it was created by enabling rapid pattern changing by cyclic configurations of a multiplexing base. So we have a wide acceptance angle, which leads to semi-isotropic resolution using the simple flat system geometry. And we have a high SNR, high multiplexing SNR, which is the optimal multiplexing gain. And also you have seen that the setup is really simple. Again, I don't know how you're familiar with, but arrays, ultrasonic arrays usually have a lot of elements, a lot of wires, and a lot of hardware in there, as opposed to this setup. And if we talk about prospects, we think that combining high-power LED sources with this solution would enable us to create really low-cost and high-quality optoacoustic imaging setups. And that's it. Thank you.
Do we have any question? Yes.
Thank you for this nice talk. Is there an advantage or possibility to encode also phase, not amplitude?
Yeah, you are definitely right that if we will use phase, the SNR gain will be even better. It's possible. We decided at some stage that it will be technically more difficult to do, so we chose the amplitude mask. But yeah, the factor between them is only a multiplication by 2, so it wasn't really a big advantage for us, so we decided to go with something which is simpler to implement.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you.
Yes,